All right, we are live. All right, mic check. One, two, three. Mic check. One, two, three. All right, well, hello everyone. Welcome to Geopolitics Wednesday as the world turns. Um, Today we have a good show for you. Today is Wednesday, July 25th. With that said, what we're going to do today is go ahead and jump to the show. All right, this first article comes from CNBC and it's titled Xi and Modi visited Rwanda and supplied millions of dollars. Here's why. Chinese President Xi Jinping, accompanied by Rwanda President Paul Kagame, arrived at the Urugui, Uru, Uruwiru State House in Kigali, Rwanda on July 23rd, 2018. The leaders of the world's two largest emerging economies have both just visited the tiny, landlocked country of Rwanda separately and showed themselves to be friends with deep pockets. Chinese President Xi Jinping landed in Rwanda's capital, Kigali, on Sunday, where he met with his Rwandan counterpart, Paul Kagame. China granted Rwanda a loan of 126 million for the building of two roads, the latter country's Minister of Finance, Ziel N, told Reuters. On Monday evening, after Xi's departure earlier in the day, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi touched down in Kigali. Meetings resulted in the signing of two loan agreements, each worth $100 million, for investment in agriculture and the development of special economic zones. The meeting signified the first time a Chinese or Indian leader has visited Rwanda. China and India are the world's two most populous nations, with 1.6 billion and 1.3 billion inhabitants, respectively. China is likely to be the world's fastest growing major economy in 2018, a mantle China once held. The latter is now the world's second largest economy after the US. Rwanda's recent history has been marked by civil war and ethnic conflict. It was ravaged by the genocide of the Tutsi ethnic group in 1994, in which over a half million people were killed. Home to approximately 12 million people, it is now in the process of transitioning into a middle-income economy and reducing its dependence on foreign aid. The East African country is also promoting itself as a technology hub. Ghana is currently chairperson of the African Union. As such, Rwanda becomes shorthand for engagement with Africa generally. Jared Jeffrey, political analyst at South Africa-based research firm NKC African Economics, told CNBC via email. He added that the deals inked with China and India were a significant sum for the small Rwandan economy. Modi's visit is arguably more notable than Xi's, as India's ascendancy in Africa was less meteoric, meteoric than China's. Indigo Ellis, Africa analyst at consultancy Ferris Maplecroft, told CNBC via email. He added that Ghana views cooperation between the world's developing countries as the future. The Rwandan president is spearheading the establishment of a single market across the African continent for goods and services, which would encompass a combined gross domestic product of $2.5 trillion. The majority of the African Union's 55 members have signed up, although Nigeria, the continent's largest economy, is yet to endorse the proposal. The issue of trade may have another dimension for Kagame. It seems that the visit from Xi was an opportunity to take a subtle dig at the US, with which the country is having a small trade spat over second-hand clothing, Jeffrey added. China relates to Africa as an equal, Kagame said on Monday, a statement implying that others did not, Jeffrey pointed out. Kagame is sending a strong message to the West that Rwanda does not need Washington's paternalistic version of aid when China and India are ready and willing to invest in the country, said Ellis. Xi and Modi are traveling in Africa ahead of a BRIC summit in Johannesburg, South Africa, which begins on Wednesday. Xi's Africa itinerary began in Senegal over the weekend and will also include a stop in Mauritius after the South African meeting. Meanwhile, Modi traveled to Uganda on Tuesday. Interesting. So we have both presidents of China and India visiting Rwanda, as the article says. Rwanda's president, Paul Kagame, sits as the chairperson on the African Union. So you can say Rwanda is the entry point to Africa. So these two presidents are visiting Africa, visiting Rwanda. It belongs to Rwanda to butter up trade with other African countries. As the saying goes, the way to a man's heart to his stomach. So the way to Africa is to rule Rwanda. Let me know if I'm right or wrong on this one.
Politically speaking, you would be right, but overall, it's really not. But Paul is a strong man inside the African Union. He's similar to how Gaddafi was. Same sort of aggression, but not the same ambitions, so to speak. Gaddafi had very grand ambitions, and Paul does not. Um, the problem with and there's no realistically there's really no problem, but Modi is Indian, and because Kenya was a former British colony, there was a lot of Indian, and India was a former British colony. There was a lot of Indians who traveled back and forth between Africa or African colonies that were colonized by the British at the time during colonialism that traveled back and forth. So that's why there's such a relationship between Kenya and India. There's a lot of investments that have been going into um, East Africa from India. And then when you take in the Chinese really need access to those ports now more than ever because it comes up the Red Sea.
Okay. Okay. Now that I can understand. That I can understand. Any comments, Prince?
No, no, man. I'm learning. I'm learning on this one. On this one.
All right. So it said that the BRICS summit is in South Africa. I know you mentioned that to me. Told me about that. And the Indian president is going to. So he already visited. He said Uganda, which, if you look at the map, Rwanda, Uganda is right across the Victoria Lake from each other. Um, what could Uganda? What could be the reason for Modi visiting Uganda?
There's raw materials inside Uganda as well. As Uganda is also an access port, and I think into the DRC, if I remember correctly. Um, if you pull up your map.
Yeah, it is. And I misspoke. Uganda and Rwanda are border neighbors.
Right. So they're somewhat of a landlocked country. Actually, they are landlocked, but they're entry points into DRC. So um, if you want to get into DRC, you're going to have to start building infrastructure inside Uganda and Rwanda. But we know that Rwanda has been stealing resources out of DRC under Paul, anyways, with their henchmen. So same thing in Uganda; they've been doing the same thing. So
Now, that part of the Democratic Republic of the is the poorer area. The eastern part of the DRC is the poorer area compared to Kinshasa, which is on the uh, western side of the Democratic Republic. Uh, that's more of the that's the city, and
The capital.
yeah, the capital, the largest city in DRC, and across the lake or the river is um, the capital, either the large city of the Republic of the Congo or the capital. So they right those two cities right across the river from each other. So I say this to say there's a lot of trade in that area of the western part of the DRC, but the eastern part, comparatively to the western part, is poorer. You know, I can't imagine Rwanda and Uganda stealing resources from the DRC if the capital or the largest city was in the east. But yeah, I said to say, okay, I see what you're saying. I also have heard that Rwanda, mainly Rwanda, was stealing um, raw goods, raw materials from the DRC. But that's good insight. Uganda shares a larger border with uh, Rwanda and
Mhm.
few large lakes on the border. And also, you have Lake Victoria that separates Uganda from Tanzania, and you have Kenya on the side. Okay, Kenya's right there. Okay.
Yeah, it's a complicated puzzle for the continent, at least on that portion of the continent. And the reason why they can easily go into DRC is because there's a lack of governance in that area, because there's so much infighting inside the DRC itself. So
Interesting. Okay. But I didn't know Paul Kagame sat as the chairman of the Union. So he's pretty much,
yeah,
I won't say running the show,
he's
but
imposing.
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that he was in the. He's the one that's imposing tariffs on Chinese goods or all goods that come into Africa at 2.5% in order to stop um, foreign governments from trying to subsidize um, the politicians of each African country. Because what's happening is those foreign governments like the United States and the UK and whatnot are actually trying to buy their way into Africa. And there's a lot of money that's being pushed under the table through laundering. And what happens is the money goes to the top of the political scale, but it never reaches the actual state itself or the bottom where the people are. So what Paul is proposing is 2.5% tariff on goods that come in from foreign countries to subsidize the subsidize the welfare of each African country, so that they don't have to they don't have to beg for money from anybody else. They just put a tariff on each good on goods coming in. So.
And so, Ephraim, did you want to say something?
Yeah. So who's trying to get into the DRC? China.
Uh,
There's a lot of countries that want to get into the DRC. The DRC has a lot of lithium inside of it. That's how you get your batteries in your phones and your electric vehicles.
Is that what's it called? It starts with a C. Not cobalt. There was another word. Was it cobalt? No, it's not cobalt. It was another word. That started with a C. So, but I'm sorry. Go ahead. But so is that one of the reasons why China wants to get into Kenya? I mean, into what's that? What we're looking at? Rwanda, to get a pathway into. I just had it on my screen. Oh, you must have took it down. But is that one of the reasons why they want to get into in over there by that lake into Rwanda, to have a passageway into the DRC?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
They can always go. They can always go the other way. From the west. But I think what they want is to lock countries in Africa into these infrastructure development projects that will allow China to cement themselves into into the infrastructure of the continent itself.
Okay. Okay.
See, the Europeans and the Americans didn't do anything like that. So what happened with those, what happened with those countries, all they did was they siphoned all the material out of the continent, and then they left, and the continent never developed. So if you go into certain portions of the continent, it was, it was very backwards. They were like 35, 40, 50 years behind. But now with that China's and making these investments into it, everybody wants to do business with China because China has a lot of money to throw around, and it's a win-win. It's a win-win situation for China because in Africa, because Africa needs the infrastructure and China needs the raw material. Whereas when the United States and the European powers were in control, they just took and took and took, and they never really returned any. There was no reciprocity added to it. So now it's too late for the Americans and the Europeans to get involved because infrastructure is being tied up with China and India.
Now, I mean, it's not as if it was for a reason of shortage of funds because the U.S. and Europe or whatever could just print more, send more, or whatever. But I wouldn't think that it was a light of foresight to be like, hey, we need to be here for about the next 150 years. So why would they not have seen the long-term gain, in that? Because it really, at the end of the day, it wouldn't cost them nothing. Because the RI would have already been built in. So why wouldn't they have made that play?
Because they're jaded by their racism. I mean, you can look at Puerto Rico and you can see that the lack of infrastructure in Puerto Rico, as their Commonwealth of the United States, is indicative of white people's worldview of people who are not white. Puerto Rico is suffering right now because they don't have the necessary infrastructure in place. Had the United States invested into wind turbines and micro power plants throughout the continent and allowed Puerto Rico to flourish, Puerto Rico could be worth 10 times what it is now.
But I mean, okay. So if racism is a factor, do you think that the race system would supersede the greed and the opportunity to make a killer return if they just threw the money at it? I mean, they don't even have to like the people, but if they were just like, shit, we don't like them, we think they're this, that, and the other, but shit, we can go 10x instead of 1x if we throw a couple bucks to build some schools, build some roads, pave some stuff. They wouldn't have done that. I mean, the racism was just so entrenched that they just wanted to get in and get a couple crumbs and get out, that they wouldn't want to get a couple bricks instead of crumbs.
They don't see it that way, and they're paying the price for it now, right? They don't see it that way.
Sure. All right. Brazzaville and Kinshasa are twin cities. Kinshasa is the largest city and the capital of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Brazzaville is the largest city and the capital of the Republic of the Congo, and they are divided only by the Congo River. And this is Kinshasa, as off in the distance, seen from Brazzaville. So that's how close these largest cities of each country and the capital of each country are from each other. Both combined, the population is around 20 million, I believe. So, yeah, so that's it. What's going on, Ulysses? How you doing?
Hey, Lionel, what's going on, man? What's good, everyone?
Hey, what's going on, bro? What's going on?
Hey, I just wanted to touch on something real quick. Preeman mentioned about the DRC and its cobalt deposits, and actually, the Congo has the largest cobalt deposits, and cobalt is one of the main components in lithium-ion battery production. So a lot of the aggressions and stuff that was taking place in the Congo, particularly over like the last 15, 20 years, largely had to do with resource acquisition of cobalt deposits.
Thanks. I knew it started with the letter C. I just didn't know.
Yeah, no, you were spot on.
All right. Let's get to our next article. This is from SputnikNews.com. U.S. government seeks a gap. Okay. Come on. U.S. government seeks to gag lawyer for Russian national Maria Butina. This was dated July 25th. A trial date remains unset in the case of Russian national Maria Butina, who was arrested on July 15th for acting as foreign agent of Russia, but failing to register with U.S. authorities. A client Butina's defense denies. Her trial is in court of public opinion remains ongoing. However, and though a tidal wave of misleading and critical reporting on Butina has been published since her arrest, it was Butina's attorney the government sought to gag Wednesday. Assistant U.S. Attorney Thomas Chambers refused to issue discovery to to defense attorney Robert Driscoll until a protective order is secured on it, thereby gagging Driscoll on its subjects. Discovery is a process in criminal proceedings wherein the prosecution turns over its evidence in the defense. The government took objection to Driscoll's media appearance and argued that he could leak evidence to the media. Okay. Saunders told Judge Tanya Khan that Driscoll reportedly violated the local rule, which constrains an attorney's public comments about cases they are working on. Bucky was heard in a status hearing Wednesday for United States of America v. Martila Butina. Could ask Driscoll, do you think it is your client's interest to have this case tried in the press? Driscoll said that the media appearances he's done are an eye dropper in the tsunami of negative press that's already convicted her. Reasoning, I got zealously representing you. I got the zealously representing you. Ms. Butina is the subject of national incorrect media reporting that I'm trying to push back on, he argued. Driscoll cited the CNN report from the night prior, which stated that Butina received training as a spy in Russia, an accusation of which the government has not levied against his client and which he had to correct. Moreover, the big issue in the media, according to Driscoll, concerns a claim in the government's memorandum in support of pretrial detention, a document which outlines the prosecution's case against releasing Butina on bail before her trial, which was disputed in court on July 18th. Butina offered an individual other than her boyfriend sex in exchange for a position within a special interest organization, the document states. Driscoll said, we don't believe that to be true, adding that the government is refusing to provide evidence for that. Another piece of fake news about Butina, which was not raised by the defense but has raised eyebrows on social media, was that she attended a meeting between former Russian ambassador to the U.S., Sergei Kislyak, these names, Kislyak, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and U.S. President Donald Trump. The reporter who posted it later corrected herself when it became obvious it was a case of mistaken identity. As it turns out, the woman pictured was National Security Counselor Kari Lukic. She and Butina have both red hair. Butina has been pictured with Kislyak in a selfie, which the government put forth as evidence of the inability of law enforcement to make sure Butina would flee to the embrace of the Russian embassy in D.C. But it was taken in passing, Driscoll said at the pre-trial hearing at a movie screening hosted by a Russian cultural center in Washington. Trutkan alluded to the District of Columbia news erudition, saying that D.C. has a limited jury pool, calling potential jurors unfavorable to Russia, but would be too put it lightly. Radio Sputnik's loud and clear host, Brian Becker, said Wednesday. The government said that it has 4.6 terabytes, wow, of evidence in its first round of discovery, and that another round, roughly the same size, will be ready to release to the defense in the next few weeks. The defense is seeking records of 8 hours of testimony Butina made before the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee in April. According to her attorney, she has turned over records of her communications with Alexander Torshin, the Russian official whom she is alleged to have been coordinating with. Butina is also accused of having solicited some $125,000 to finance her operations in the U.S., while CNN reports that she informed the Senate Intelligence Committee of her backing from Russian billionaire Konstantin Tukhalev. After Driscoll said Wednesday that the government was being coy over whether or not they had reviewed that evidence, Sanders stated they had but did not have it. What? Sanders stated they had but did not have it in their possession. Trupin offered to have the government issue the substance of that bit of discovery, 8 hours of closed-door hearings, or orally to the defense. At the heart of the case are messages to and from Butina, which on their face appear damning. However, their context is unknown. At Butina's pretrial detention hearing, Driscoll noted that she had exchanged hundreds of thousands of messages with her mentor, Torshin, but that the government was focusing only on those which could be viewed as evidence of guilt when decontextualized. Driscoll said the pictures of dogs and questions about picking up American toothpaste exchanged by the two have been ignored. Another piece of evidence raised by the government was a selfie Butina took in front of the U.S. Capitol building on Inauguration Day, 2016. Torshin told her that she was a daredevil to which she replied, "Good teaching." Driscoll argued that every other student of international relations in Washington, D.C. has taken the same selfie. The most cited comment in the Torshin and Butina's catalog is one which came a few days after the 2016 election, in which Butina said she was ready for further orders, according to the FBI affidavit in the case. The remark was made via a Twitter direct message. Loud and Clear host John Hiroko, a 15-year veteran of the Central Intelligence Agency, said on Wednesday that despite spike communications are not done over Twitter, I can guarantee you that this was either a joke or it was taken completely out of context. Driscoll said he will issue a motion to dismiss the indictment against Butina as the process of discovery furthers, and will issue a motion appealing Butina's pretrial detention, during which she sits in solitary confinement for 2 weeks. The next status hearing is scheduled for September 10th. Meanwhile, Trupin gave the government until August 8th to submit another protective order on the discovery, giving the defense until August 15th to state any objections. We remain confident that Ms. Butina will be vindicated in this process, and that everyone will realize the truth of the matter, Driscoll told reporters after exiting the courthouse Wednesday. All right, Mike, you sent this to us to talk to discuss. Let's out.
Yeah, before I do that, the people in the chat said they can barely hear you, so you got to turn your mic volume up.
I might have to reboot. I don't think there's a volume to this thing.
While you fix your mic, I'll go ahead. The reason why I sent this article is because they're trying to make this woman out to be to be like some kind of spy or something to that effect. Basically, they're trying to turn her into a basket case as a prop so that they can use her to bring down Trump, as well as exchange Snowden in Russia for her, and that's not going to happen. They're using her as a bulwark to impeach Trump by 2020 or before 2020. She's a conservative, and she's a Second Amendment supporter, something that they don't have in Russia. So what they've been looking at, what she's been looking to do, is transfer some of the U.S. Constitution, such as the amendments in the Constitution, into Russian politics, and she's actually in the opposition of Putin. She's in the opposition party. So to say that she's a Russian spy, she's this agent, is this propaganda in order to make her out to be, this Trump, collusion with Trump, when in reality there really was no collusion.
There was some other person that they had spoke to for a brief minute that was in Trump's in his cabinet, and they were trying to paint him out as a possible Russian spy or something like that. Is there like a witch hunt or something like this going, and they've decided they're gonna pin it on this chick?
They're gonna use this girl as the fall guy for Trump's impeachment, and that's not really gonna work all that well. They've politicized the agencies against Trump, but she doesn't really have any solid weight in terms of spying. I mean, who spies and leaves all their texts unencrypted?
No proficient spy.
She's no spy at all. What information does she have? She wasn't a part of Putin's cabinet. She was no. She didn't work for the KGB or anything like that. She was no. She had no official status with Moscow. I mean, she was in the opposition party. She would be the equivalent of a Tea Party evangelist inside Russia.
I mean, this is why I was asking if this is like a witch hunt to do just what you were saying, like create a situation where they're trying to create some sort of exchange, personnel exchange, right? Some Russian spy for like Edward Snowden or something like that. But to do so, they're going to cook up a bunch of half-cocked theories as to who the quote-unquote spy is. Because again, I saw something, maybe it was like this morning, about there was some guy, he was in the Trump cabinet for something to do with some sort of foreign in Russia, and all of a sudden they're
you cut out the last 10 seconds. Can you repeat what you said?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I was just kind of reiterating what we're discussing here, like how there seems to be like a witch hunt, because a lot of these people that they're hunting down, they don't have anything of any kind of real significance.
Are you talking about Paul Manafort? So the guy you mentioning?
No, not Paul Manafort. There was some other guy that they were talking about. He was doing the rounds on the talk shows here, maybe just like a day or so ago, just like talking about the ridiculousness of the suggestion that he's a damn spy or something.
Oh, Carter Page. That's right.
Okay, maybe that's him. Yeah.
Okay, well, what's up, guys? Sorry I'm late.
What's going on, Noah?
Yeah, what's up?
Pretty good. But as for Carter Page, I think Carter Page actually, he's not like a spy for them, but he got compromised, and then now he's working with the federal government to get his sentences reduced.
Wait, what was how was he compromised? Like, kind of talk to that. I don't have all the details on this.
The way they're trying to say that you're compromised is because you did business with Russians. So if you went to a Russian kindergarten and you spoke to Russian children, you're potentially compromised now.
That easy, huh?
That's basically what they're reducing it to. Now, what's interesting about that is that Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, under the Clinton Foundation, went to Russia and gave speeches and got millions of dollars for it during the Clinton campaign, or prior to the Clinton campaign. But she's not registered as an agent.
Right.
Okay.
Am I coming in clear now?
A little bit. You gotta speak up better.
All right, I'll try to speak up a little louder.
There you go. You sound good right there.
All right. Any other points on the last topic?
I think Preem wanted to go.
Oh, go ahead, Frank.
Nah, I mean, to me, I don't
Sound far away.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Okay, I stepped downstairs. Let me see. Am I picking up a little bit better now?
About the same.
Now it should be clear.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I don't see this eventually ever getting anywhere. Because what happened? I mean, we're like almost 2 years in, and the stuff that's coming up now is like new stuff they're like finding out. And if we are the greatest country on earth, greatest intelligence agency, yada yada yo, you can't discover something last week Wednesday, and then all of a sudden, 6 days later, this is going to be the thing that actually nails it. If there was something, they would have been found. Mm-hmm.
Well, what they will use it for is for the midterms. So that's why Trump canceled his meeting with Putin for September.
You know, I mean, if this was like 14 or 15 years ago, that might work because they kind of had their arms around all the apparatus that would, dissemble information out here to the masses. But now people get their information from so many sources. Like, I don't have to go to CNN. I mean, I have places that may get the story from CNN, and I'll go to this source and trust this source to disseminate that information for me, and to say whether it's BS or whether it's legit, So they're like playing by like old school rules, and it's not going to work. I mean, somebody showed us something a couple of days ago to where like for example, that gray haired guy on CNN, Anderson Cooper, he started doing his show like live on Facebook Live and streaming at the same time. And his average viewership in his prime time slot, which is I think 8 to 9 or 9 to 10 or whatever, was like 2,400 people. And this is on Facebook Live, and this is Anderson Cooper on CNN. So, irrespective of what they put out and what they drop, it's not getting out there like that. And even if it gets out like that, people now have their little niche creators that kind of grab it and say, "Let me tell you what this shit is all about." And they would trust that a whole lot more than they trust Anderson Cooper. I mean, these like the Anderson, like the CNNs and the Fox News, those are like what BBC or Reuters used to be back in the day. To where the ABCs or the CBS would get something from Reuters, and then the nighttime anchors would kind of tell us because we trusted them. Now those nighttime anchors are the Reuters and the BBCs, and we get it from. I mean, just pick your poison. It could be Anthony Brian Logan. It could be Mike Cernovich. It could be Milo Yiannopoulos. It could be Ben Shapiro. It could be, the Lottery Crowder. It could be whoever. Alex Jones. It could be whoever. It could be whoever. It could be the Mad Turks. It could be
I get your point.
Yeah, go ahead.
I get your point. I get your point. I think now what you're starting to see is Facebook or social media sites have been colluding with the government to determine what's fake news and what's authentic news. And you'll probably see a lot of those other independent sites go away, especially Russia Today. Russia has been already slapped as with the fake news emblem for the most part by the State Department. So you'll probably see a lot of that traffic start to die down as well. The algorithms on YouTube has basically shifted Russia Today to the to the back end. Same thing with YouTube. Same thing with Facebook. So what I'm saying here is that the midterms are coming up, and it's very important to understand that perception for Americans is reality, even if they can't prove it, right? So if they can get a case, build up a case good enough to say, oh, this woman was in collusion with the Trump administration, then that can really hurt the Republicans going forward. And you may not see a revival of the Republican Party in 2020. You may even see Trump disappear by 2019.
And that is true. And I'm going to wrap this up because I think you have to, we have to move things along. But what I see happening, not even just on that level, but if I, were to break it down to the whole, even like the whole YouTube level, to where they're trying to go after like the larger peoples, comparatively speaking, like the RTs. What you're having now are these lot smaller, for lack of a better word, splinter cells that are popping up, that are more nuanced, that are harder to kind of grab, and they just, whoever's trying to shut that down and limit that reach and limit that voice getting out, it's kind of like trying to catch a eel with like a greased glove. They can't possibly be fast enough to catch all these people, all these things that are popping up, and those folks and those sources are going to get smarter and smarter and be able to move their network, from platform to platform to platform, or from place to place to place, to go ahead and talk to them. So they may get somebody who may have, let's say, for instance, like a better example, in Alex Jones, that may have 2 million people, but how many smaller people has he spawned that may have 50,000 viewers, 20,000 viewers, 100,000 viewers, 200,000 viewers, that they will never be able to get their hands around? And then of those people, how many of those people are going to spawn smaller? And I'm seeing that happen now. I'm not speculating. I'm seeing that happen now, not just in like the dissemination of like the news, but like even for, even in the manosphere, I'm seeing little smaller splinter places. Hell, you can use us, this place as an example of like just seven people, but how much influence do we have? Because I take what I hear here and I reach out, on a weekly basis on how many platforms, and I say, hey man, I'm on a place and I'm amongst cats where I'm just soaking up game, and these cats are thorough when we won't, and then cats' ears get perked and they hear it, and they they come in here and on their platform they're talking about it, or they just take little bits and pieces and drop it to their little audience here. So they will never be able to get a hand around the city because it's too fast and it's too nimble. It's too nimble. It's too nimble now. It's too nimble.
All right. So it's our next topic. Hold on, loud enough. This is from PressTV.com. Israel airstrike targets undisclosed region in Syria. Israel says it has carried out an airstrike on an undisclosed region in Syria in what it claims to be a response to 2 rocket launches from the country. The Israeli military released a statement on Wednesday claiming it had targeted the rocket launcher that fired the projectiles. The statement noted that the launchers surrounding the area were also targeted in the attack, but there have been no immediate reports of possible casualties or the extent of damage caused due to the Israeli raid. On Tuesday, Israeli military forces targeted a Syrian Air Force fighter jet over the Golan Heights as it was flying in Syria's airspace and conducting a series of airstrikes against the positions of foreign-sponsored Takfiri militants in the occupied territories. Israel has been on high alert in recent days as the Syrian government forces advance against foreign-backed terrorists near the Golan Heights. The Tel Aviv regime has recently increased its airstrikes in Syria. Damascus has on multiple occasions denounced the Israeli regime's aggression, and also warned about the dangerous repercussions of Israeli assaults on its territory. Tel Aviv is widely believed to have been providing weapons to anti-Damascus militants as well as medical treatments to Takfiri elements wounded in Syria inside the occupied Golan Heights. Earlier this month, Syrian air defenses repelled as Israeli attack on the country's Quneitra province. Back on May 10th, is back on May 10th, Israel conducted what it called its most intensive airstrikes on Syria in decades. According to Russia's air defense ministry, Israel has used 28 warplanes in its airstrikes and fired 70 missiles. But Damascus and Moscow said the Syrian army managed to shoot down over half of the missiles. The Tel Aviv regime at the time claimed that its assault was in response to a barrage of 20 rockets fired from Syria and Israel military outposts in Golan. All right. What does this say, Mike?
Well, basically, what it's saying is that Israel is covering up for ISIS. They're basically the air force for ISIS at this point. What the article doesn't really mention is that the white helmets, which is supposed to be Syria's version of the Red Cross, who's been sponsored by the United States and Britain and France at the tune of $100 million, are really just terrorists with white helmets on. They make themselves seem like they're they're first responders, but they're not really first responders. So what happened last week was that Israel somehow brokered a deal to evacuate these white helmets. It was about 800 to 1,000 guys with their families and so on and so forth on these multiple buses out of the Syrian southern province and bring them through Israel all the way into Jordan, where they drop
And then
them off
in United States, UK, Canada.
Say that again.
Yeah, and I said also to resettle their families once they're in Jordan, in the United States, Canada, or the UK.
Right. They were all agents. They were all agents to begin with, and it's interesting that Israel wants to participate in humanitarian relief, but in Gaza and in the West Bank, they don't seem to have too much interest there in terms of humanitarian relief. But what I'm saying here is that Israel has become, the Air Force and the logistics hub and intelligence hub for for ISIS at this point.
So what do you think is the long-term goal? Because I've been looking at all of this, and I'm not quite sure where Israel, Saudi Arabia, that's working with them in the Gulf, is really their plan, other than containment of Iran. What other long-term or strategic goal do you think is the purpose of this? Because if Syria continues to be destabilized, it will spill over into Jordan and Israel without a doubt. So why do you think they are doing this?
Well, it actually wouldn't spill into Israel and Jordan. What happened is it would destabilize the region to the point where it's like Iraq, where you just have warring factions warring with each other. And Israel is pretty isolated from having all those walls put up, and Jordan is pretty isolated because they have the gates put up on their border, so they don't have to really worry about things spilling into their country, so to speak.
Okay, I see. And so then, what do you think Russia's goal in this, other than stabilization and their own self-interest? What do you think their interest in
long-term goal is?
Yeah.
Well, their long-term goal is to secure that the port of Tartus, as well as the Khamenei air base that they have. Now, originally, the goal was to get the Iranians to build their naval port in their airport or their airfields inside that same region, north of Tartus and Khamenei, so that it's out of range for the Israeli Air Force and ground troops to actually get to, at least in a reasonable fashion. They wouldn't be able to get there. But that doesn't seem to be on the table anymore. And what Russia needs is to stabilize the country, because if they lose that naval port in the Khamenei air base, then what happens is they lose access to the Mediterranean Sea.
Right. And I remember, I think maybe it was like a couple of months ago, Vladimir Putin was in Israel meeting with the prime minister over there, if I'm not mistaken.
No, he was, yeah.
Well, they're buddies, right? So they have to, you know, Israel is the broker between the United States and Russia. So when America can't talk to Russia directly for political reasons, as well as perception reasons, then they go through Israel, and Israel runs to Moscow.
No, this wouldn't happen to be tied into anything with regards to what Trump recently did, like seemingly out of nowhere, tweeting in all caps that he's begging on Rouhani over in Iran. Now, is what this article that we just discussed tied into that in any way?
They're trying to justify, basically that the reason why they're bombing Syria is because Iran is there. But the reality is, you were bombing Syria for years before the Iranians got there. So what difference does it make? The objective for Saudi Arabia and Israel is to push Iran back into their borders, make them ice Korea. But that's not going to happen because Iran has a lot of commodities on the market that everybody wants, and it's not like North Korea where they're sitting in between a global power, and then they're sitting in the DMZ where South Korea has them isolated. Iran is different. Iran sits in a pretty dangerous neighborhood. So, but they have friends, right? So they have a lot of what do you call that? Shiite Muslims all over the region. So if anything was to happen, if there was an attack to happen, then what would happen is those warring parties would actually suffer. Saudi Arabia would be the first one, and then the UAE would be the second, and then Israel would really suffer because Lebanon would launch 10,000 missiles right into into Tel Aviv. Israel. Yeah, right into Tel Aviv, where they can't handle that capacity of a strike. So
right, and if Saudi Arabia and I meant without U.S. or allied forces back in Saudi Arabia, Iran would wipe the floor with them almost immediately.
Right. What they're really afraid about is that the last war that Iran had with Iraq, that lasted 8 years, and that was pretty bloody, and the Iranians made it out pretty, not so much as unscathed, but they made it out victoriously for the most part of it, because they're still standing, right? Still have their standing military, still have a standing air force. And they can you close off. Yeah, we can hear you.
All right.
There you go.
They have a stand. They have the ability to close off the Strait of Hormuz.
Right.
All right. Let's get to our next article. This next article comes from RT.com, titled Trump delays second Putin summit for 2019 over Russia witch hunt.
Wait, now, did you guys already do the one for what is it? This is how Russia could test NATO?
No, that's next.
Okay.
All right. This article is dated July 25th. U.S. President Donald Trump has decided to postpone the next meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin until sometime in 2019, after the Russia witch hunt ends, National Security Advisor John Bolton said. Quote, the president believes that the next bilateral meeting with President Putin should take place after the Russia witch hunt is over, so we've agreed that it will be after the first of the year, end quote, Bolton said in a statement. Following the summit in Helsinki, Finland last week, Trump asked Bolton to invite Putin to Washington in the fall of 2018. The U.S. president tweeted that he was looking forward to the second meeting so the two leaders could continue addressing the problems discussed in Helsinki, such as stopping terrorism, security for Israel, nuclear proliferation, cyber attacks, trade, Ukraine, Middle East peace, North Korea, and more. Quote, there are many answers, some easy and some hard, to these problems, but they can all be solved, end quote, Trump said on July 19th. Bolton announced one, Bolton's announcement comes a day after the Kremlin confirmed receiving the invitation from the White House. Putin's senior foreign and policy advisor, Yuri Yushakov, told reporters that there was a need for another summit after last week's meeting in Helsinki. The two leaders could also meet at the sidelines of the G20 summit in Argentina this November, Yushakov said. Trump's invitation to the Russian president was not well received by the media and on Capitol Hill. Democrats responded with the usual rhetoric accusing Trump of being Putin's puppet, but even the Republican majority leaders said they would not invite Putin to address Congress. By contrast, a poll conducted by The Hill found that 54% of Americans support a second summit between the two leaders in Washington, and 61% say that better relations with Russia are in the best interest of the United States. Trump has frequently used the phrase witch hunt to describe the probe by special counsel Robert Mueller, who was appointed in May 2017 to investigate claims of Russian meddling in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. Since Attorney General Jeff Sessions recused himself of investigating the Trump campaign on ethical grounds, it was Deputy AG Rod Rosenstein who appointed Mueller. The appointment followed Trump's dismissal of FBI Director Jim Comey on advice from Rosenstein himself. All right. This sounds like a juicy tidbit. What stuck out to you on this one, Mike?
Well, I don't know. This whole, I feel like there's something there. I just don't know if it's really important, right? Like maybe he has some kind of deal with the Russians, but is Putin his handler? I doubt that, you know? So it just depends on whether or not there's really something to it at the end of the day. But also, by the way, just like recently, they just put out articles of impeachment against Rod Rosenstein, I think like 4 hours ago.
Damn, that was okay. Like hours ago. Okay.
Yeah, so they're gonna try to impeach him.
Anybody else?
Yeah. This was Trump delaying the meeting until 2019. Yeah. Wait,
yes.
my mic on? Okay, I'm sorry. I know my mic what was on. Yeah. Probably so. What did I see? I didn't read it, but I saw it. It was whoever his guy is, Bowden, the guy with the glasses and the crazy hair. He's been around for a while. They just delayed it because they wanted the investigation to go away. I mean, until the investigation was done. I know for a fact there's nothing there because we're 2 years in. If there was anything there, they would have dropped it by now. I'm not saying this guy is the greatest guy, but if there was something there, they would have found it. That's one. Two, this guy has been in business for some 40 odd years. And me, just at my level, the way how I run shit is excuse my French, I do things to where it's like it's under the presumption or assumption that if I were to ever get out of it, that I'm covered. So I know for a fact the guy at his level, he's not, when they do things, they're gonna do things as if everybody's watching. even if they're not running, they're thinking about running, they're just going to do it with the premise that, okay, if there's a clawback and somebody comes back, we have to make sure we got all our T's dotted and all our, all our I's dotted and all of our T's crossed. They don't get sloppy like that. I don't see this guy being sloppy like that, and I just don't see. I don't see it. I don't see it. So even if someone offered him something, I don't see him taking that type of bait, because he knows if he was to go ahead and win out and something came up, that they could always come back and they can always uncover everything. So you kind of play the game as if you always have someone watching over your shoulder. That's how you should play the game. That's how I play the game, and at my level, and I'm 99.9999% sure that's how this guy plays the game. So that's why when they come up with all these little things like, oh, this guy record, like for instance, and I don't want to get too far off the subject, there was this whole thing where Cohen he taped the president and the tape got released. Well, what they don't say is that the only reason the tape got released on CNN was because Trump authorized it. If Trump had never authorized the release of the tapes, CNN would not have those tapes, because Trump had to authorize or say it was okay for those tapes to be released in order for CNN to play those tapes. And the reason
wasn't Trump who authorized it. It was Cohen.
No. It was Trump. Cohen had the tapes, but it was up to Trump to authorize the release of those tapes, because and I can't spit off my tongue right now. And I heard it this morning. I heard it from more than one source, but it was up to Trump as the client of the lawyer to authorize the release of those tapes. So it wasn't like Cohen said, "Hey, I got tapes. Here you go, play them." It doesn't work that way. It was up to Trump to blank the attorney-client privilege. It was up to Trump to blank the attorney-client privilege, whatever that phrase is that fills in that blank.
Anyone else?
It's like I was saying earlier that perception is everything. And so even if they don't have the tangible evidence, then what they're going to try to do is hook up something just enough to make it stick to the policies that they have for collusion, as well as being a rogue agent, so to speak. There is no evidence that Russia hacked the election, especially based on the election results, where Hillary had more votes than Trump himself. So how can Russians hack the election to allow Trump to win when he didn't win by a numerical value? It didn't make any sense to begin with. What they're accusing the Russians of is basically they bought ads, from I should say the Russians, but the state. The state-owned media, which is RT and Sputnik, had basically bought ads through social media platforms such as Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and that's considered to be hacking, so to speak, or persuading American voters to vote a certain way. But the reality is, they didn't vote. Whatever they did, whatever they're accusing them of, was not effective to sway the election, because Trump didn't win by numerical value. So what exactly did they do? When Jim Comey was on the stand, when Jim Comey was on the stand, they asked John McCain asked him, "Do we have evidence of?" Jim Comey basically said that they didn't have legitimate evidence, which are logs in the security world. It's called logs. They didn't have logs to back up the accusation of the Russians hacking. So John McCain basically replied back, said, "We don't really need evidence. Basically, we don't need the logs. We know the Russians did it."
That was always the point of contention with me with regards to this whole controversy, was that if it was the electorate that gave Trump the election, right? My question was always then, well, was the electorate on the take? Did the Russians pay the electorate off? that was always, even because numerically, Hillary Clinton got more votes. So I was like, well, where did the Russian influence actually come in?
They're saying that they hacked the DNC server, but when the FBI never did any forensics on the server because the DNC had denied them access to the server, so they brought in CrowdStrike, and CrowdStrike was the one who did the analysis, the forensic analysis on the server, and what they found was that there was no Russian hacking there. There was no external.
It was leaked internally, right? Wasn't it leaked internally?
It was transferred. The logs show that it was transferred to a high-speed device, which is a USB thumb drive. So some USB 3.0 device that transferred it at 2 to 5 gigs a second or something to that effect. Is the way the data was removed from the or copied from the device itself.
And that was my whole point. Second, as far as the how the news is transferred, just those 2 points right there. The speed of the data, how the data was transferred, that's been verified. It's a fact, that it wasn't, over wire, over Ethernet, over cable. It was done at a speed to where someone had to plug into the doggone thing and transfer it on and take the doggone thing out, put it in their pocket, put it in a briefcase, and walk on out the door. That one thing, and then the other point I went and forgot, but my ultimate point was that the average lay person is aware of that. I know that. And I'm not like 24/7, 365. I'm not part of the whole conspiratorium. So even if the MSNBCs, the CNNs, the Fox News, or whoever, the Hills, the pundits, they put that stuff out, the average lay person is aware of the actual facts. And they know that this is a witch hunt, that this is BS. So when they come up with, every week is something new that they come up with, and the average people know that. And they're like, listen, I'm not saying I really like this guy, but you guys have gone so doggone far off the rails. It's just like, stop it. I can't co-sign y'all no more. You guys are giving me a choice.
Well, it's important to understand that this information was not really put out to the public up until recently. I talked about this with Black Gnostic Speaks about a year or so ago, that why this happened, and before the information even hit the fan, because of my background. But a lot of this information is being curated by state agencies. When they say 17 agencies agreed upon it was the Russians that hacked it. So who are these 17 agencies? Because there's only 3 agencies that really matter for Homeland Security. You have Threat Intelligence, which is the CIA. You have Threat Investigation, which is the FBI, and then you have DHS, which is Threat Mitigation. These are the only agencies that do any do any of the cyber work, in protecting the nation state. And then you have the NSA, which is National Security Agency, that does other activities that may or may not be in line with the state government itself. But what I'm saying is the 17 agencies that they keep citing, you can have the Department of Energy or NASA. Okay, well, they're an agency too. How the hell does NASA know what happened to the DNC server?
Well, is that in part of me like no, I'm not trying to get too far off track, but is that tied in? This is a question because I don't know, but is that tied in to that thing that Obama signed on his way out the door, to where stuff could be shared amongst agencies? So as long as it's passed through the Department of Energy or Transportation, they can say, hey, it went through an agency. We have to count that one. How many do we have now? We got 13. Okay, let's go ahead and pass it through another one. Okay, now we got 14. Oh, let's pass it. And then they come up with that 17 agency numbers. Is that tied in to that order Obama signed on his way out the door, to where they could share information?
No, the head of each agency basically have expressed themselves publicly saying that we believe. If they use the words "we believe," they don't say we have evidence. They just say we believe. Yeah. So what I'm saying is that they don't have sufficient evidence to prove that the Russians hacked anything. So if they did hack it, what exactly did they hack? Was it the ballots? Which ballots was it? Which state was it? Which states are using electronic ballot systems? Most states are using analog human ballot systems where you have somebody rotating in a machine that basically counts the votes.
You could easily narrow it down. You could target it, man, like where it occurred. You could do like what just Mike said. Like it would be, you could do it, but there's not a go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just going to say that even if they could do it, there's no evidence that it even happened. Right? There's no, because Trump didn't win by by the ballot. So where's the compromise at?
That's a good point. I never heard of it.
That was the whole thing. That's what I was touching on. It was the Electoral College that gave him the election. It wasn't. Right. He didn't need the majority vote. So my whole thought this whole time was like, okay, well, look, if Russia had any involvement with this, it would have been the Electoral College that would have been on the take that swayed the election over in Trump's favor. You'd be looking at where all your electoral votes came from.
Mm-hmm. And I guess at the end of the day, that's kind of why they call it derangement, because at a certain point in time, you got to realize, okay, I don't have a good enough hand to go ahead and play this thing out. I need to go ahead and fold, and we can just go ahead and stop back fresh. But they just continue to play this hand. And again, I'm not saying he's the greatest guy, but they played a hand that you just can't freaking win on. And I know it's going to cost them a whole lot more than it would have cost them if they had just folded. If they had just folded, went back to the drawing board, came back anew. But I really honestly think it's going to cost them a whole lot more, because now they just gone off the rails with the type of folks that they even allowed into their camp and the things that they're talking about. But again, I digress. My apologies right now.
Oh, no problem.
Well, the only way Trump can get out of this whole entire collusion thing is if he bombs Iran. That's the only way he's going to get out of this, because he needs something big to justify moving the attention, because they tried to throw the prostitute at him, the porn star, right? And that didn't go anywhere. That didn't go anywhere. I mean, he already agreed with. So there's concessions that he's making with Putin on the table for geopolitical purposes, right? Get the guys out of Syria. North Korea is another geopolitical move that he has to deal with Putin on, as well as Xi Jinping, but more importantly Putin. And Iran is a major chess piece that he needs to take care of, and that's the only way he can really save his career is by going into Iran. It's a gutsy move. It's a move that the United States is going to lose. It'll be, the loss would be so big that they'll never recover from it.
Right. Iran is not Iraq, so this will be. It'll pale in comparison to how much we've already lost in Iraq.
Right, and then you factor in WikiLeaks, which is another wild card on the table. He needs Julian Assange to be taken in order to justify his position, to solidify that he's legitimate. He's a legitimate president because he bombed another country, and then he was able to take down Julian Assange, this perpetrator who works with the Russians, who realistically doesn't work with the Russians. He's in a pickle right now, just on the perception level, not actually on the tangible.
And it's funny you even bring Assange up, because his name resurfaced in the news here again, just a couple of days ago. Yeah,
he's sick. He's getting sick, yep. So he needs to go to a hospital. He can't get out. He can't get out the embassy.
He can't get out. Yep.
Okay. Well, let's move on to our next article. This is one's from defense1.com. Can you all hear me clearly?
Loud and clear.
You're good.
All right. This is how Russia could test NATO, warns former U.S. Army Europe commander. I'll read that. At Poland's northeast border, there is only a narrow strip of inland border connecting it to NATO. Members Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. It's called Suwalki. Suwalki Corridor, and it has long been an object of concern for Western military leaders. To the west sits a unique spot, Russian territory, the exclave of Kaliningrad, a key military port on the Baltic Sea. To the east is Belarus, a key Russian military ally. On the eve of this week's NATO summit, the former commanding general of U.S. Army Europe is issuing a new warning. Cutting off that corridor could be how Russian President Vladimir Putin cuts off the Baltic states from the rest of NATO, possibly without firing a shot. Situated between Belarus and the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad, it serves as the only land link between NATO and its 3 Baltic members, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, says a new report co-authored by retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, scheduled for release on Monday at the Center for European Analysis, or CEPA, which provided Defense One a copy prior to publication. If Russian forces ever establish control over this corridor, or even threaten to free movement of NATO forces and material through it, they could cut the Baltic states off from the rest of the alliance and potentially obstruct Allied reinforcements advancing by land through Poland. The significance of the corridor to NATO and the unpredictability of Russian action has Hodges worried. The idea of Russia actively invading Europe may seem far-fetched, and it is, as we conceive of it. I don't think that Russia intends to invade Europe as though it's 1991. They don't have the capacity to do that anymore, especially with the 29 forces of NATO. It completely dwarfs them, said Hodges, who retired this year. Excuse me. But if you accept Putin's goal is the destabilization of NATO alliance and convince some members of unaligned countries to join Russia's sphere of influence, then it becomes easier to imagine Putin engineering some sort of crisis to make the alliance look impotent or irrelevant to its members' security. And that's what has Hodges worried. The Kremlin wants a seat at the high table, and they do that, and they do that by undermining the alliance. Hodges said, the way they do that is show that the alliance cannot protect one of its members, show that we are too slow, that we can't deter that sort of attack. If you accept that premise, that they might do a limited attack to demonstrate that NATO cannot protect its members, that will create a problem. It's exactly the sort of scenario Russia drilled last fall during its most recent grand-scale exercise, Zapad 2017. The event took place primarily in Belarus, but involved troops and military assets across Russia, including ICBMs. Kaliningrad played a key role in the exercise, according to Phil Carber, president of the Potomac Foundation and one of the authors of the Russian New Generation Warfare Study, a classified analysis of Russian tactics and capabilities written for the U.S. military in 2016. The Zapad exercise pitted the Russian military against several unnamed artificial countries that nevertheless exist in the same geographical location as Poland, Latvia, and Lithuania. The main drive appeared to be hitting eastern Latvia and dropping down into Lithuania and cutting across the Kaliningrad. From Belarus, Carver said, from there, in the event of an actual invasion, Russia could create a line of defense along the corridor that would enable Russia to cut off access from Poland to Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. In the process, you essentially cut off the Baltics without killing a lot of people or taking over major cities, said Carver. For Hodges, the main lesson from Zapad was that the Russian military could move a lot of equipment and troops into Belarus at high speed, making it difficult for Western observers to distinguish between an exercise and actual military action. There were at least 100,000 troops involved, he said. They had a little dog and pony show in Belarus, but 80 or 90,000 troops were involved elsewhere, he said. Hodges, in his new SIPA report, lays out a variety of pretexts that Russia might use to spark a crisis in order to invade the corridor. They read as similar to what happened in Ukraine in 2014. Disinformation and hybrid warfare tactics will play a key role in each. In one scenario, Kremlin-backed separatists in Kaliningrad or Belarus attack, read that again. In one scenario, Kremlin-backed separatists in Kaliningrad or Belarus attack a border crossing in Poland or Lithuania, forcing a police response. Russia could cite their Polish or Lithuanian response as a justification for limited military action. In another, Belarusian president, Alexander GL, whose ties to Putin are strained, is dispatched in a phony coup, forcing a Russian invasion to stabilize the country. Used in combination with localized minority unrest, the cloak in the fog of chaos and uncertainty, Russia will be in a position to justify the projection of its military power near, into, and through NATO territory, all while plausibly shifting the blame for instability onto the targets of its aggression, notes the report. In tandem with these efforts, Moscow seized the public discourse over the border dispute with NATO states through a coordinated propaganda campaign to support Russia's rationale for expanding and reuniting Kaliningrad with mainland Russia. The ultimate object of the military action would not be to occupy the capital of a NATO country so much as to expose the alliance's incompetence. Quote, if they ever tried anything, they would do it systematically so that they could achieve whatever they wanted to achieve before the alliance caught on, end quote, says Hodges. All right, anti-gravity. You requested to put this on the docket. What about this stood out to you?
Well, I saw this article, after the whole, big deal with they're talking about with Trump and Putin, and more so, I wanted to see what you guys thought. Your thoughts about it was Russia's ultimate goal is always to undermine NATO. So if they can do it any way they can get it, they'll do it any way they can get it.
Well, I think it's the opposite way. It's really NATO did undermine Russia. So establishing all these NATO states around Russia keeps them immobilized. So these exercises that Russia has been planning is something that's necessary because at some point the attack is imminent. Especially if the Ukraine joins NATO. And Finland joins NATO, then it's really game on. You don't want to be isolated if you're Russia. Now, what Russia could do is they could form a military-to-military cooperation with Iran, using the Caspian Sea as a waterway to get up to the Baltic states.
Well, I was going to say, isn't this just more or less a continuation of everything else we've been seeing over in that region? You had there was like a war with Georgia some time ago, and then there was Crimea. We've seen a lot of things going on over there, and this largely has to do with some of these states aligning with NATO-based policies versus aligning with more of BRICS oriented policies. So I mean, wouldn't this be kind of just more like, on the line of, you know, a lot of these rumblings and things that's been going on as a result of that?
So Georgia was a bit different. In order for anybody to join NATO, your borders have to be defined, clearly defined. And the reason why Israel can't join is because they keep gobbling up, you know, Palestinian territory and occupying Syria, so they can't join because their borders keep changing every week. But Georgia tried to join by taking South Ossetia, by declaring that territory, which was a buffer in between Russia and Georgia. They tried to take the territory and claim it and try to update Google Maps as quickly as possible, or Google Earth. I mean, as quickly as possible to justify that you know, this territory actually belongs to them, so therefore they can join NATO. And that didn't work. That pissed the Russians off, and so the Russians went in and completely cleared out the entire area. And the response from Russia is an example of what's going to happen if Ukraine joins or Finland joins NATO. That the Russians will react.
Yeah, I was going to say, because from how that sounded a lot now, because the Georgia South Ossetia, that was, gosh, when was that? It was like mid 2000s, late
2008.
2008. Okay,
August 2008.
Right. I want to show everybody the Suwalki Gap right here on this map. So, like the article said, a thin piece of strip that's seven.
I'm not sharing your screen line now.
Oh goodness! Well, how did I? All right. I don't know, man. I don't know what happened. All right, this is the Suwalki Gap, a thin piece of land that separates. The article says NATO from Lithuania, Latvia, and I think it said Estonia. So it's a thin piece
Estonia's at the top.
Yeah, thin piece of land. Go to the map. You have it right here. This is Poland. As you see my cursor going in a circle, you have Lithuania, Latvia, and then Estonia. And this is Kaliningrad right here.
Kaliningrad.
Oh yeah, Kaliningrad. My apologies. All right. Just want to point that out for y'all.
Yeah, I don't know how long NATO could stay in power, because France and Germany has been talking about building an EU army that is different from NATO. So we'll probably see in the next couple of years, if the European Union falls apart, then you'll probably see NATO fall apart right away. And you'll probably see you know, the emergence of an EU army just take its place. But I think the EU army is really being designed to respond to European capitalism in Africa, as a way to going into Africa and basically kick out any opposition forces to European or Western capitalism, as well as push the Chinese out. Now the Chinese aren't stupid, so the Chinese are putting private military corporations in place instead of their own military, using Blackwater.
Or the former head of Blackwater, I should say.
Eric Prince.
Yeah. But do you think an EU army would work? Because if the EU, you know, fails, or you know, they have some kind of irrecoverable differences, then that's pretty much it.
That would be the only ace up their sleeve. The only wild card to actually maintain stability is through an EU army. Whereas NATO as a security bulwark is really outdated and doesn't really meet, you know, the necessary challenges that it was really set out for, right? I mean, it was really an answer to the Warsaw Pact that the Soviet Union had, and you don't have that anymore. And those the former states are now a part of NATO now. So what value does NATO really serve, and why should they put more money into it? That's where the EU army will come in as a response to the failings of NATO, because I don't think nobody really wants to get into a war with Russia, at least in the East, primarily because they like, you know, they like the stability as it is. But why get into a shooting war with you know, the 800-pound gorilla?
Right, but I'm skeptical that the EU army would work, because the anti-EU sentiments are already, you know, pretty rampant in France, you know, Germany to a certain extent. and then definitely Italy, Spain, etc., Greece. So if there is an EU army and one of the former EU member states, tries to leave or does anything else, they might fear being occupied.
Mm-hmm. Well, as the markets start to downturn in the way that they do with all these tariffs that the United States put on Europe, you may see Europeans shift to the east anyways, and that includes Russia. Russia has lots of gas and oil, and Europeans need energy as well as goods from China. There really is no reason to deal with the United States at this point, other than for the sake of the dollar.
Right. I also don't see why they haven't, after this, whole tariff fiasco, they wouldn't go hard on renewable energies to wean themselves off from that Russian pipeline.
Because they can't. The industries that they support or that they use for capital gains requires heavy energy, and the infrastructure is really designed around that.
So do you think they don't have enough money to start making that shift over the next 20 years, 25 years?
No. They're all the industries are completely linked, intertwined and interlinked into Russian energy deliveries. So that's the whole reason why you have the Nord Stream pipeline and the South Stream pipeline, is because there's a necessity to get that clean energy into Europe from Russia. They don't, there is no real clean energy, green energy that can really be sufficient for Europeans, especially in the wintertime when it gets really cold. They need that natural gas and that oil.
Right. Okay.
Whereas in Saudi Arabia and Syria and those places where there's very little snow or very little climate change, they can survive off of the off of solar panels and wind turbines, but not in Europe. That wouldn't work.
Well, at least for now. Who knows?
At all, right?
Energy will go in the future, but right.
Well, I'm saying for the amount of megawatts that you would need to drive Europeans' economy, renewable energy at this point doesn't provide that substance. So it would be a waste of money for them to actually pump that money into it now. I mean, you see some European countries who have wind turbines up, and as well as some solar arrays on their roof decks, but that's not enough to drive an economy.
Anybody?
We can go to the next article.
Yeah. Anti-gravity Ulysses, what time are you all starting your show?
We went ahead and decided to go ahead and just reschedule. So we're going to go ahead and just chime in on this one.
All right. The next two articles we're going to blend together. Next one is a lengthy one. This one is from Stratfor.com. This is from their Worldview. It's one of their Worldview articles. The real target of Trump's trade war. Scroll down here. European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker hopes to do what no leader has managed to do so far: appease U.S. President Donald Trump with a trade deal. Whenever he travels to Washington this week, Juncker will present Trump with an offer aimed at staving off a trade war between two of the world's largest economies. But the odds are not in his favor. Instead of making arguments to break down trade barriers around the world, the Trump administration has worked to seal the United States off behind higher tariffs on goods such as aluminum, steel, washing machines, and Chinese industrial products. And so long as the goal of this campaign is on shielding the domestic market and not on opening up foreign markets, Juncker's efforts and those of other world leaders may be in vain. Trump has been complaining about the U.S. trade deficit since long before he entered the political arena. As a guest on the Oprah Winfrey Show in 1988, for instance, he said the U.S. trade with Japan is not free trade. If you ever go to Japan right now and try to sell something, forget about it. Just forget about it. It's almost impossible. They come over here, they sell their cars, their VCRs, they knock the hell out of our companies. 30 years later, he's still singing the same tune, albeit about China and smartphones instead of Japan and VCRs, and from the White House rather than on daytime television. For all of the criticism Trump has faced in the past for changing his position on issues, he has been nothing if not consistent in his message on trade. It is quite clear that Trump's definition of fair trade has to do with the rules that govern trade, but with the end has to do not with the rules that govern trade, but with the end results. If one side exports more than the other, it is winning. It's a view that dates back to the 16th century Europe, and one that has prompted even Republican politicians to accuse the president of harboring a mercantile trade policy. Economists as far back as the 18th century have dismissed the strategy as misguided. In The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith argued, nothing can be more absurd than this whole doctrine of the balance of trade. Rather than focusing on sheer volume, classical liberal economists like Smith, David Hume, and David Ricardo encouraged countries to specialize in and trade the goods they produce the best for the goods they produce poorly to maximize productivity and wealth. Of course, Trump and a contingent of American voters disagree. In their eyes, 60 years of specialization and free trade has hollowed out the U.S. manufacturing industry and the communities it once supported. Detroit, for instance, or Gary, Indiana. Trade has been a process of creative destruction for the United States, making and breaking great cities across the country over time. From those communities, they have experienced more destruction than creation lately. A policy backlash was bound to emerge. The response is Trump's trade policy, which the president now appears inclined to pursue. Heedless of economists' warnings to protect his voters, his voter base, and to do what he thinks is right for the U.S. economy. To that end, the White House has focused on restricting imports first. The issue is not about ensuring market access abroad, as Washington's tariffs on steel and aluminum demonstrate. The Trump administration argued that restriction imports was necessary to boost domestic production and bring operations at U.S. steel mills up to 80% of their capacity, citing national security concerns. At stake was economic and industrial stability. In other words, employment levels, not the capabilities of the U.S. military. And when granting exemptions from the tariffs, Washington entertained requests only from countries that had agreed to cap their exports to the United States. The Trump administration didn't even flinch at the tariffs trading partners imposed on the U.S. exports in retaliation, because protecting domestic industry was the point of the endeavor. The same is true for the negotiations over the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, and the United States Korea Free Trade Agreement, or KORUS. Throughout the NAFTA talks, the United States has remained steadfast in the commitment to revising the agreement in favor of the domestic automotive sector. Washington initially pushed for stricter rules of origin in the sector, such as the U.S.-made content would make up at least 50% of the added added value for vehicles sold in the trade area. It has since eased up on that situation, on that stipulation, calling instead for Mexican auto manufacturers to raise the minimum wage or for requirements to pay automotive workers a percentage of value added if their wages exceed $15 per hour. Either way, U.S. automotive workers stand to gain. Similarly, during the chorus talks, Washington insisted on going back on a previous promise to open its market for heavy-duty vehicles, such as pickup trucks, to Korean competition. In light of these discussions and of the European Union's own experiences with the U.S. administration, Trump called for a block of foe on trade while touring the continent earlier this month. Juncker has his work cut out for him. The main priority for this trip is to try to avoid the auto tariffs Trump has threatened to impose on the European Union. Tariffs are a grim prospect for European automakers, which exported $43.9 billion worth of passenger vehicles to the United States in 2017, and for Germany, whose cars accounted for roughly half of that figure. The threat is even more serious. The United States is Germany's second largest export market for vehicles, behind only the United Kingdom. But Germany has a special place in Trump's trade agenda, and the object of some of his harshest rebukes. The president believes the country is winning at trade because of a large trade surplus, something that must be evidence of unfair trade practices on its part. Germany, meanwhile, is concerned that a 20 to 25% tariff on imported vehicles could cost its automotive industry access to the U.S. market. Enter Juncker's trade deal. While its specifics are unclear, the offer appears to be a modest trade agreement in which both sides would remove tariffs on industrial goods, leaving out more sensitive sectors such as agriculture. The arrangement would be ideal for Germany. For one thing, German industrial goods are so competitive that rival U.S. products wouldn't pose much of a threat on the EU market. They would first undercut the goods of less competitive EU members. For another, Germany industrial juggernaut that it is could benefit if the United States were to lower some of its trade barriers for EU members. A trade deal covering just manufactured goods, moreover, would need the approval of only a qualified majority of EU members to pass, rather than a unanimous vote. That means that smaller member states, such as Portugal or Latvia, will be less likely to derail the agreement. France, however, may be a difficult story. Although France doesn't have much to lose in the prospective deal, since it excludes agriculture, it doesn't have much to gain either. France, after all, exports far fewer vehicles to the United States than Germany does. The French government also has repeatedly stated that it would not negotiate with the United States under pressure. Furthermore, in its quest to enhance the European Union's strategic autonomy, Paris would want to be sure Washington had agreed to lift tariffs on steel and aluminum before making any concessions to the Trump administration. And the complications don't stop at the European Union. A narrow trade deal, like the one Juncker is preparing to lay out, conflicts with the rules of the World Trade Organization, which typically requires bilateral deals to be comprehensive. In addition, Trump may lack the authority to sign the deal himself. The U.S. Trade Promotion Authority Act, which lays out the process whereby Congress can delegate trade negotiation authority to the president, prescribes several prerequisites that a trade deal must satisfy to be eligible for fast tracking. These provisions will require the deal to cover issues such as investment protection that could, in turn, necessitate a unanimous vote in the European Union to approve. Germany may well be better off trying to convince the bloc to reduce its own 10% auto tariffs to match the United States' current 2.5% level. In exchange, the Brussels will probably demand that Washington remove its 25% tariffs on truck imports. Feasibility aside, a small trade deal on industrial goods may not be in the United States' best interest. The country's claim its greatest competitive advantage is specialization, in the parlance of Hume, Smith, and Ricardo, in agricultural exports, not in industrial goods. Likewise, it is the U.S. agricultural sector that has borne the brunt of the global retaliation against Washington's tariffs. The United States will probably press to include agriculture in a trade deal with the European Union, a request that wouldn't sit well with France. What's more, consumption is such a deeply ingrained part of American culture that a consistent trade deficit is all but inevitable. Lowering trade barriers to European goods could end up widening the United States trade deficit with the European Union. All the more so since a strong U.S. dollar will give American consumers more purchasing power overseas. Sooner or later, Europe may get relief from Trump's trade war, not by their own actions, but because of the groundswell of domestic opposition to the administration's trade policies. From this perspective, it's hard to imagine that the United States and the European Union will reach a quick deal to avert auto tariffs, despite Juncker's efforts. Trump, by all appearances, is simply less interested in breaking down trade barriers to U.S. goods overseas than he is in restricting imports into the United States. Consequently, the European Union and other U.S. trade partners will probably keep reaching the same impasse in their attempts to negotiate with the United States on trade. Sooner or later, though, they may get relief from Trump's trade war, not by their own actions, but because of the groundswell of domestic opposition to the administration's trade policies. Economists have already pointed out that while tariffs may help U.S. steel and aluminum producers, they could hurt the industries that consume those metals, which employ more people and could lose more than 146,000 jobs, according to some estimates. The tariffs on Chinese goods so far focus on parts, meaning that they, too, could drive down U.S. employment. And the United States could lose some 830,000 jobs if Trump follows through with the auto tariffs, according to the Center for Automotive Research. Even aside from the risks to workers, the tariffs, taxes on U.S. consumers by any other name, could cause inflation to rise. In time, the domestic consequences of Trump's economic policies may force the president to retreat or else face a backlash from voters, floundering industries, and lawmakers. For Juncker and other world leaders, that moment probably won't come soon enough. Trump may accept the European Union's offer on the table, but only if his proposed tariffs provoke sufficient uproar at home. Despite their hopes for a deal with Trump, Juncker and the European Union may not have much say over that matter. With each progressive battle, Trump's trade war is turning into a war on trade itself. That was a lengthy one. Gentlemen, this is open mic.
Hey, I wanted to speak to this one because, this type of stuff affects one of our lines of business. So I just posted a link there. Maybe you want to repost that in the chat.
I got it.
I know. Okay. This kind of speaks to the nature of the long-term effects of this trade war. Now, that article there is about how you have European automotive firms that are now striking their long-term deals with Chinese giants, right? So now what they're doing is, because what we did was we actually slapped tariffs on European SUVs that are made here, but that are exported and sold to China, right? So there's like these secondary levels of tariffs that are being applied to European European automotive products that really isn't even really being spoke about in detail. So that article right there kind of speaks to the long-term objectives of what a lot of these European firms are now looking to do, given the nature of the trade war and how we're basically going in and just kind of like ripping up what was there and then just saying, okay, we want to bring something new to the table. Now, I'll tell you right now, if you came to me and did that, and all the while the Chinese have been in my ear like, hey, look, we're letting you know right now, dude, like, we're going to be able to give you a better deal here in the future. So just keep an eye out for what the U.S. does. And once the U.S. did exactly what the Chinese were hedging on the U.S. doing, they came right in with these EV development deals for all of these large scale manufacturers. All of them got factories in China now, or being built in China right now to produce batteries. Even Tesla, we just talked about this a couple of days ago. Tesla then put tossed their hat in the ring, and they got Gigafactory 3 being built right outside Shanghai. That's just getting started. So you can see what that article was speaking to about how the trade war was basically a war on trade itself, because it seems like it's just kind of all imploded.
Yeah, you're talking some hardcore facts right there. What's up, gentlemen? How are you guys doing?
What's going on?
Hey, what's going on, man?
All right, man. Yeah, that's a hell of a point to trade. This is to me, I think it's kind of senseless right now because it's like trying to push shit against the tide. I mean, we're trying to stop it, but I don't think we are going to be able to do that. China is going to be a big player here, and I think a lot of these tariffs and some of this other stuff that we're playing is only going to hurt our economy, more. But it's going to be interesting to see how this shakes out. But once again, it just goes back to my point. I think that myself and Complex were talking about before about we need to be getting in on this game as well. That's why I think Africa and some other other areas we can get into and develop product cheaply. We need to get into that ourselves. I think there's a lot of room still here, but that's my take on what's going on. But this thing is shaping up quick, though.
Yeah. Well, that the thought here is that these are all going to be maneuvers to spur manufacturing here in the U.S. Right? And you can see how that's possible or feasible, or you can see the thought behind it. I guess my issue is that you don't necessarily make those moves when you haven't sort of bootstrapped your manufacturing base to accommodate like this new paradigm of manufacturing. Like we largely dismantled and sold off and rendered relatively useless our manufacturing base here in the U.S. So to pull this now, I mean, I don't know. One can make an argument whether it was like the best move at the right time or not.
I think it was a poor move, but cost a lot of businesses here a lot of money. I think it was a very poor move, and a lot of people are looking at this shit sideways. But I guess we're just going to have to work our way through this.
Well, you have to keep in mind that Trump had to keep up with his promises that he made during his campaign, and he's keeping to them for the most part, whether for bad or for good or for bad. Right.
Not the brightest guy in the world, but I follow you.
Actually, he is pretty bright in this regard. He's stymieing China's growth, just temporarily, maybe for a few months, maybe for a year or so. That really does hurt the Chinese.
Shoveling shit against the tide. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, we saw what happened with ZTE. He almost collapsed the company within a week, and those are 100,000 jobs. Same thing with Huawei. He almost collapsed the company in just a little over a month. So he's proven the point that a trade war can be effective in some areas. and those are two of China's most prominent telecom and PC companies.
But for how long?
For the global market.
For how long? For how long can he do this? That's the question.
It depends. I mean, if he has to cut his nose off to spite his face, then he'll probably just go out and go buy another nose somewhere else. But for the most part, he's comfortable with where it is right now. China has already come to him on their hands and knees, saying, "Okay, we get your point now. How can we negotiate?" So he drafts up a resolution to negotiate, and they sign it, and then he goes back and he reneges on it. And that's typical U.S. culture, right? Political culture is to renege on agreements that one has already signed in the prior. But when it comes to the Europeans not being able to ship their vehicles over here because of these tariffs, Volkswagen only has 3% of the U.S. market, so it doesn't really hurt them so much. But their operations are still, their operations are still in play. But at the same time, the amount of investment that they're going to make inside of America going forward is going to hurt them.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's where when you say that, China came back to the table, coming back on their hands and knees to the table, to see that's where I think China sold them the dummy, right? I mean, because what I keep finding is that, like, our policy is to be more aggressive than China seemingly is, right? But it seems as though every time that we push something new, China pulls something out the gambit that comes from like left field. And that's what I was saying. All of these new potential trade deals that just started popping up over the last few weeks with Europe, right? And I said, like, following the automotive markets, I'm seeing what's taking place. I'm like, dude, that's a major shift. That's a major.
That's exactly right, Complex.
Exactly. Yeah, and when I was reading, oh, go ahead, Mike.
No, I was gonna ask Ulysses. You mean the 0% tariffs on Europe that Trump established this week?
Well, no, that's in response to all of these development deals that are now being put on paper with these with the Chinese firms and the automotive manufacturers. I mean, yeah, sure, you come back with that after you already said, okay, we're going to put tariffs on your stuff. That even if the exports out, even if it's made here, right, made in the U.S., we're still going to put tariffs on it because it's going to be exported to China, right? So you're indirectly affecting them. So now you want to come back and then say, okay, well look here, we'll zero tariffs on your stuff after you already made that maneuver. But see, you made that offer after the Chinese came to us and said, okay, well, look, here's $2 billion. Allow us to build out battery manufacturers in Germany. See, so the Germans don't even have to outsource to China. China is like, look, we'll do the investment in Germany.
Yeah, they don't.
Okay, then the tariff? Then
exactly right.
What zero tariffs? As if you're giving me something. The Chinese just invested $2 billion in battery plants in my country. And you're gonna come back at me with this like as some sort of token?
Well, don't forget that. Don't forget that Trump. Don't forget that Trump actually put 25% tariff on cars made in Mexico that get shipped back into the United States as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
I'm saying that if you're doing all of this to somehow spur manufacturing and growth here, like and this is just my thought. I'm no specialist at this stuff, right? But very least in a way where once you do it, you crank up manufacturing here. Right? He's done that largely with no sort of or plan to kind of make up for the shift in the tide. Like this. Just take for example, like imported steel. You slap a tariff on Chinese steel, even with the 25% tariff on it, it's still cheaper than the steel that's produced here. So I would have done the tariff thing once I had something in place that would have said, okay, well, look, with those tariffs, if we slap the tariffs on there, the steel that we produce here will be cheaper than that. Then that would have incentivized manufacturing and the purchasing of U.S. produced steel. But we didn't see that.
Right.
No, it's not going to happen either. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think, all the stuff about cars and stuff is, all well and good, but the real story is the agriculture sector, and that's what's getting really pummeled right now. And regarding the WTO, when it comes to agriculture, the U.S. flaunts the WTO all the time with their massive subsidies, loans to farmers, and the farm lobby is probably not the most powerful, but one of the most powerful lobbies in the United States. And so it remains to be seen if, if it keeps going, whether or not the farmers are going to turn on the president. But if a lot of these other countries continue to slap on tariffs and, trade barriers to U.S. agricultural products, it'll be a big boon for, particularly Africa, Latin America, and a lot of the other countries around the world, because the U.S. corn is something like 20 to 30% cheaper, even when it's exported to all these other countries than if it was to be produced domestically. So that could be a huge opportunity for any, like a lot of African countries to start producing their agricultural goods. That's all I have to say.
Brazil had actually stepped in, for in place of the United States agricultural, so soybeans and wheat and corn. Russia is the number one country with non-GMO agricultural products. So there's been a lot of shift to go to Russia and get some of this organic goodness that Whole Foods needs so badly that they can't seem to get now. Because of some of these tariffs.
Right, and their soybeans are extremely high quality and highly nutritious. I think I was reading an article maybe a couple of months ago that China purchased something like several $1 billion worth of Russian soybeans, almost tripling their previous investment, their purchasing of soybeans in that country. So they're definitely, once they put on the soybean tariffs, they've been looking for alternatives beyond just Brazil. They're going to look also.
Yeah, and well, they can just park their money in different places, but pork is also another commodity that they've been looking at too. So
importing,
they don't,
or you mean producing?
Importing. Okay. Because they like pork fried rice, but it's okay.
No, pork is the number one meat in China. It's ridiculous.
Right.
Even more than chicken. Yeah, but go ahead, Mike.
No, I wasn't saying anything. I think that was Ulysses.
I'm sorry. I was just laughing, dude. I'm sorry.
Nah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I say, Anton, you said pork is the number one meat in China?
Hands down.
Pork buns.
but that's where the whole soybean, fiasco comes into effect, is because they have, I think, the world's largest supply of, pigs, either them or the United States. I don't remember. And so they have to use soybean meal in the feeding of their pigs. That's one of the ingredients they put in. And there's no real alternative to soybeans, right? That's that cheap. So the prices of pork goes up. That'll really hurt the Chinese consumers, which the Chinese government does not want. So either they'll have to subsidize it more, or they'll have to figure out some other way.
I was just gonna. Oh, go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry.
No, you go right ahead. I'll go right after you. I just want to respond to BGS.
I was gonna say, with regards to replacements for like animal feed for soy and stuff like that, hemp is being explored as a inexpensive alternative to that as well. So there's livestock livestock feed alternatives that are now starting to be looked at on the market because of a lot of the soy stuff that's going on. And I was going to speak to another point that you made, but I kind of lost it. But go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just going to reply back to BGS in the chat when he basically said that it's the purpose of the tariffs is to bring back jobs and manufacturing back to the United States. But I think to your point, it's already game over. That ship has already sailed. All the battery manufacturing that you would need is actually being pushed inside outside of Shanghai, and then you think about the manufacturing. It's coming back to it's already in Mexico for the most part, any North American based products. But what I read earlier was that Brazil is going to be the go-to for manufacturing now because of how the pipeline or the distance between Brazil and California for shipping of goods, not California, the ports of
Florida,
of the Gulf, the Gulf ports of Louisiana. They can ship cars up quicker than what would come from China if they had to manufacture those vehicles. And supposedly they are going to manufacture those vehicles. Volkswagen has a major plant down there.
Yeah, they do. Yep. In Brazil.
Yeah, and Ford, I think Ford has one too. So Brazil has become a pivoting member of this whole entire trade war. So they seem to be making out very well. And also my understanding is that China has also starting to build facilities over there in the Sinai region. So they're working with Egypt to build these manufacturing facilities inside the Sinai that can allow goods to be shipped to Europe quicker than by cargo ship.
Like right through
Suez.
Right. The Suez. Yeah. The other thing to speak to that, Mike, also, I mean, this is why I was saying largely, I think China's been selling the dummy a lot in this trade war, right? Because I've been looking at it. It's a lot of strategic maneuvering. Like, okay, we'll try to make a fair and equitable deal with these guys, but once they don't, we'll just go ahead and make the deal that we already kind of been working on with these other partners here. And as you start to see it all shift and change, like I said, Europe's coming on board. Soybean, the major soybean mantle has now been passed on to a BRICS partner. You know what I mean? It's like there's a lot of things that you're not going to see it overnight. It's not going to happen quickly, but every day you see this company's establishing these new business talks with the Chinese firm here. I'm always hearing about what type of investment the Chinese are doing with African nations and stuff like that, versus with what we're doing. We're going insular, cutting stuff off. Like there's nothing that I really see that's advantageous to our to the United States game plan with regards to global engagement. It's the opposite of what the Chinese are doing. The Chinese are engaging the globe on a mass scale.
I think it strengthens the dollar. Dollar's not on right now, but I'm pretty sure if you pull up a chart, he could probably look at the indexes and between March, I think, or early March when the tariffs went into place, and up until now, and see how well the dollar has done in comparison to prior months or prior quarters, I should say. My understanding is that the dollar is getting stronger and not weaker. So,
well, I mean, and I'll leave the currency argument for like another discussion, right? Like, I mean, there's no doubt that it does strengthen the dollar. However, what does it tell you about your long-term prospects, right? In terms of national, your GDP, national productivity, your employment capabilities. I mean, what does it say for, again, China rolls out a 2025 plan, and we can't make heads or tails of what 2019 and 2020 is going to look like largely.
Dollar just mentioned in the chat that the dollar has been up since February 2018 since it began.
Okay, so that's when I think January was when the first tariff came into place, I believe.
Yeah,
January 21st. Was it?
I think it's first quarter. It's first quarter though. But
Right.
But Darla was saying in the chat that it's been up since February. So
Right. I think the whole strategy is kind of ass backwards. They're trying to get more coal worker jobs. Never going to happen. Steel producers in the United States, they're, Ulysses was in that industry, so he probably can speak to it better. But, that's been going down since what, like the 70s?
Good God, man.
Right.
Yeah.
So if they want to bring, oh, go ahead, Mike.
no, go finish your statement. I'll go after you.
Okay, I was just going to say if they want to bring back, or spur manufacturing in the United States, they'd be better off investing in more high tech manufacturing, right? Space manufacturing, the whole new space, industry that's coming out, or maybe aircraft, more Boeing investment in the United States, something to that effect. Next generation tech.
Yeah, I mean, producing
low
things
wage, low tech stuff. There's really no benefit.
Well, I think since the tariffs has gone in, I think car prices has also risen as well. I talked about I think we talked about this last week, but I saw flat screen TV prices have gone up significantly in comparison to what they were a couple of quarters ago. So
right, and that's the whole discussion of trade, like as the article Lionel was talking about, where he mentioned Ricardo back in, I want to say like 1785, where he came out with the idea of comparative advantage. Just because the United States can produce something at a greater quantity than another country doesn't mean it should. It should produce what it has, the comparative advantage in, which basically means whatever it can produce the best, right? And then trade with the other country for whatever it also can produce, but can produce as well, right? So if in the case of Mexico, it's cheaper labor. So let the Mexican, economy produce the cheaper wage goods, and then the United States produce the higher wage goods like laptops, or for as an example, and then trade with Mexico for oranges and bananas, and then trade the laptops. That makes sense.
I think if you start building laptops here, then what happens is the price is going to go through the roof because of the cost.
No. That was an example. I said something that's comparative advantage. I meant.
Okay.
Example.
Yeah, I think that Mexican labor has actually started becoming comparable to American labor in terms of the manufacturing process or the manufacturing output in auto manufacturing.
I was going to say, I think it's actually exceeded it because they could produce a better product cheaper.
That too, but I think that because they don't have the same UAW
right, the union regs and all that stuff.
Right, they don't have to deal with that.
Right.
They can work these guys to 20. From my understanding, they have a 24-hour plant down there as well. So that's something you don't see in the United States. These guys clock out at 5 o'clock. So assembly line shuts down after 6 o'clock.
All right. Any other points? This is open mic night, open mic session. Any other points on any other geopolitical issues?
Not that I can think of. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just gonna say I saw that I saw that they were planning to or South Korea is going to be affected by these same tariffs. So your Samsung Galaxy is going to be a lot.
Man, I was waiting for the Note 9.
Well, that's going to be like $2,000 by the time it comes out. Or like that.
Oh my goodness!
Man,
really?
the first, or should I say, the Note 7 almost blew up on me. The Note 8, I just got. The Note 9, it's going to be $2,000, man.
Now, how are they? How in what ways? How are they going to be impacted by the tariffs? What products do they produce that's going to be?
South Korea is a part of the whole entire tariff scheme. Trump put tariffs on South Korea too. That's why this whole brokering of the deal with North Korea. They're like, well, why should we talk to you when You know, we don't really need to pay you to be in our country. We can just go talk to these guys, go squash the whole entire beef, and kick you out. And if you're gonna put
That's what
tariffs on us, what's the point?
Yeah.
So all your Samsung products is really targeting Samsung. Is really what they're going after.
Wow.
Right. Samsung is pretty dominant in the U.S. That's
Right.
why.
Pretty.
Right. It's really Apple that has a problem with Samsung.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Right?
it's Apple.
So,
Yeah.
it's Apple Apple's growth has been topped off at where it can be for the last few quarters because they can only sell so many iPhones, so many watches and doodads. You know, they have to actually produce something that's going to be have a high ROI, and that car is not ready yet. It's far from ready.
Well, I was just
So
about
that
to
you
put my
see them-
tinfoil.
You see
Go ahead,
you see them diversifying their portfolio. You see them diversifying their portfolio with Apple Music and other content now. So now trying to become a record label and a content producer. For the most part,
You know, I was gonna put my my tinfoil hat on here and just say that maybe it was Samsung that had something to do with that Apple car leak last week.
Oh, there's a lot of speculation about that. I mean, it could be some disgruntled employees inside Apple.
Wait, how did
You know,
Apple?
I mean-
Not doing well, dude. For people that wonder, dude, Apple is a lot. It's not a good look for Apple right now.
Well, the picture looks all right.
Oh, okay.
What was particularly wrong with it?
Well, the problem is that it got leaked.
Oh,
Like that's not something you want leaked.
And that's all like top classified information, especially in the workplace. That doesn't really trickle down to the the geniuses at the Genius Bar in Santa Monica somewhere.
Let's not get started on those guys. But,
No,
I think Apple has gone down since Steve Jobs, died.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah,
That's what I mean.
It's not,
It's like
it's not the
behind
same
the scenes,
company.
dude. It's like behind the scenes, it's not the same Apple that people think.
What's funny about the tariffs is that the tariffs, completely exclude Apple's products from being manufactured in China and being imported into the United States. So they don't, that doesn't get rubber stamped and checked. Everything else does though.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, look, the thing is this. I mean, the whole thing about Apple repatriating the I forgot how many billions of dollars that they have sitting offshore. That largely, I've heard talks of that money being repatriated in the form of infrastructure, like investment, like manufacturing investment. But in Wisconsin and says Foxconn can build a plant, right? So I think what Apple largely just did was they just went to their and made a deal with the state of Wisconsin and built a Foxconn plant there. But overall, Apple really isn't doing anything. It hasn't really shown much. Really, I think it's largely just been stylized a lot. People are still looking at the hardware and it has the Apple look and everything, but the innovation, man, they've been falling behind big time.
Oh,
Well, it's because of the battery technology. What were you saying, Lionel?
I just connected. He meant Apple has been falling behind big time, and I agree.
Well, it's also competition now, right? So Samsung has been putting pressure on Apple to really step their game up. That's why before they didn't have an iPhone Plus, right? Until Samsung really started pushing that Note, the Samsung Note. Before that, Apple only had one size device, and that was it. And once the Galaxies and the Note Plus started coming, the Galaxy Notes came out, then that forced them to change their hand and forced them to try to innovate and keep up. But the reality is, Apple can't spin off a product fast enough in the same capacity that Samsung can, because Samsung cranks out, I think something like 25 phones a year, in comparison to Apple's only one.
Well, Samsung's different segments of the market. It's not as if Apple puts out there like, you know, a low cost prepaid phone, you know, and then, you know, they have maybe like 3 or 4 or 5 different models in between that and like their high end model, right? They don't do that. They just you get maybe 1 or 2 versions of the iPhone. That's pretty much it.
That was the deal before, but I think now what Apple is trying to do is move into that value segment. But if you move into that value segment, you know, how much of a loss are you taking? See, Samsung can afford.
Yep.
Samsung can afford to take a loss. I hear some feedback.
Is it from me?
Let's
let me mute. Y'all let me know.
Okay, yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, Samsung can afford to take a loss because they crank out a volume. I think that's going to be listed. Samsung can afford to take a loss because they're cranking out a volume for global market, whereas Apple's core market of buyers has been the United States and Europe, and now China. But Africa and Latin America is still a strong market that they can't seem to penetrate because the device costs too much because of the import tariffs that may be on it, or just the cost of development per cost of sale for the device. It just isn't there, so they can't really compete in that area where Samsung can afford to make a cheap phone for $25 and call it a Galaxy Hustler or some other bootleg product.
Right. Also,
get away with it.
You have to take into account that Samsung is like 50% of South Korea's GDP, right? So as much as they're a democracy, there is a lot of internal politicking where the South Korean government will never allow Samsung to fail. So they'll
that's because
subsidies or whatever they need to stay afloat.
Well, that's because Samsung is the lifeblood of South Korea.
Well, I mean, there's
Right, exactly.
in
South Korea, they don't. Samsung actually does a lot of stuff outside of phones. They're also a military manufacturer. I think they manufacture some military tech. I don't know exactly what it is. I can't remember right now. But they do a lot of.
They're one of those firms like Daewoo, where they're basically like a heavy industry.
Oh yeah.
They have Samsung Heavy, and then you have your they have the agricultural products, like John Deere tractors and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Escalators and elevators. So that's what I'm saying, that Apple doesn't have a diverse portfolio like that because they only focused on small gadgets, and that time is come and gone. People want something that's going to be more meaningful to their lives, and I don't think that they're going to produce an Apple TV anytime soon, where they can charge $2,000, $3,000 for a TV and get away with it.
That's true.
Right. So you guys go ahead, Mike.
No, I was going to say that, and that's where a car comes in, and where would they get their battery technology from? Is Apple going to be willing to put their money into battery development, or are they just going to look at somebody like Tesla or Panasonic or Sanyo or the rest of these or Hitachi and try to borrow technology for them to make it more cost effective?
Well, I'm gonna throw my tinfoil hat on here once again. There was an article I had sent out maybe like yesterday about
the tinfoil hat got holes in it.
It's all good, man.
It's a snapback.
It's a snapback.
Okay. You good, Danny?
Oh shit. Okay. Oh god. Okay.
New era.
So hey, dude, I'm trying to be serious here.
Okay.
So this article I sent you guys about Ford spinning off that created a whole new autonomous unit.
Yeah, I saw
to the company. Right. So there was an interesting tidbit the guy says in that piece was that they were like, okay, well, what would be the advantages, or what would be the thought behind Ford doing something like that, right? So the whole point was like to actually bring another partner. Now, I was suspecting all along that would probably be somebody like Apple, right? But then it seemed as though somebody at Apple jumped the shark and decided they wanted to release some information what Apple was trying to do in terms of like an electric car. because the whole thing with they were going to autonomous vehicles LLC or something like that, right? So it's going to be a whole different company. See, so in that scenario, I could see Apple coming in with some cash and some tech, and working with Ford to create like an offshoot brand of vehicle. I could see that scenario easily happening.
Wait,
I don't know how significant that leak was, but that's something that instantly popped into my head when I heard that release from Ford.
Now the leak you're saying about Apple, is that the leak you're talking about when the guy tried to escape to China with the hard drive full of information about Apple's autonomous vehicle?
Yeah, about the car.
Okay, so all right. Remember we tried to look up to see if Apple had any specific model car, or they're building the car. It was strictly software. So you're saying Apple will be the software part and Ford will be the hardware part, and they will merge.
Apple would be like, yeah, they would be like software, because to speak to what Mike was saying, I can't really see them jumping into this from a from a manufacturing standpoint. I really don't, because they make small gadgets, right? They don't produce anything like expansive or large. So what I would see them doing is having like one aesthetic design, the actual part, right? It would be done by Apple.
All right, now let me throw this in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Apple is known for putting their spin on technology that's already out there.
Yes,
that's been that MO from the beginning. And we all agree this getting old. They're not innovating. Now, do you think they would do that in the sense of bettering, quote unquote, bettering what Tesla already has? And it would be that let's say this comes to fruition, this Apple and Ford crossover or merger. Do you think it'll be a better looking or a Tesla with an Apple stamp on it?
No, I'm just presupposing here, right? I'm just presupposing based off of just what's been coming across the wire over the past week, right? But I'm thinking that's what Apple's game plan is. So with Apple, they would be doing things in much the same light that they've done at the juncture. It's to go after people who drive Teslas. They have a or
breaking up
something like the market segment. It's the same market segment. They'd be going after the same people who buy iPhones and Apple Watches and stuff like that. So I could totally see the competitor or a player. I mean, I would think they're not going to go after the people who go and get Nissan Leafs. That's the equivalent of them making phones, making economy phones to go after the economy market. They're not. I don't see them doing that. I see them taking their technology and the design aesthetics, and then going to someone like a Ford Autonomous Vehicles, and then giving them the.
Break it up.
I was just saying, I see them taking the technology and the design blueprints to someone like a Ford Autonomous Vehicles, and them creating a joint venture. They may give the car a name and all that kind of stuff,
Okay. Now I have a question, because it might clear this up for me. Now, per the last article, the Stratford article, it was saying even though Trump is slapping these tariffs on different countries, such as more specifically the steel and aluminum, slapping tariffs on that, in the short run, it will supply jobs for the American people by forcing the steel and aluminum company to produce steel and aluminum, because there's then a demand. But it also said, to me, it also said after that, then jobs will be lost. Am I misunderstanding what the article said, or what did they say that?
Anti-gravity?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
No, the article, the Stratford article, it was saying these tariffs Trump is slapping on other countries, specifically the steel and aluminum tariffs. It was saying that because of those tariffs, in the short run, jobs will be created because there's a demand for steel and aluminum.
Correct.
But in the long run, in the long run, jobs will be lost because of these tariffs on steel and aluminum.
Right. Well, not even on the long run, even in the short run.
Right.
How so?
You want to go, Ulysses?
Well, I was just gonna say, just to kind of speak to the point I was talking about earlier. So even with the tariffs, Chinese steel is cheaper than U.S. produced steel, right? So we're seeing evidence of everything that article just noted, right? Because I think about 3 weeks ago there was some steel plant in Ohio that they just got $500 million dumped into it to get it all up to speed for steel production, and steel facilities across the U.S. That'll be short. That'll be short because you can get going for it to be bought. But even with those tariffs, if Chinese steel comes in cheaper, I mean, it's on the buyer at that point.
So it's saying the jobs that will be gained are in manufacturing jobs.
No. The jobs that are gained are in steel and aluminum production.
Yeah, that's the manufacturing, right?
No, because manufacturing also encompasses those products and services that utilize either imported steel or domestically manufactured steel and aluminum.
All right, so American companies that what's where you put you use for it, they produce.
Yeah, the producers.
So American companies that produce steel and aluminum will employ more people, but the American jobs that uses that steel to actually make products from that steel, they will lose jobs because they're paying a higher price for the steel produced by American companies to make other things such as bikes or
right.
anything.
Right.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
And it's not even long term. It's already began. Companies are already laying off workers because of these steel
Carrier. Yeah, Carrier, that plant that that Trump he ran on like saving that job. He kind of shamed them into keeping the jobs here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they ended up laying those workers off. I think it was like this week.
Okay.
It was supposed to go to Mexico, and I think the Mexico facility was already outlined and being established anyway. So it was just a matter of time before they would actually move down there. Maybe they, I mean, they got $60 million out of it.
They got free money.
Free money.
So Trump,
a photo op.
Well, all Trump did was transfer the wealth from from the taxpayers to the oligarchs.
Right.
He's it was only supposed to be 2,000 jobs, and I'm like, really? Like that's your claim to fame? I mean, China's going through a downturn too. China's going through a downturn too. They have an over surplus of labor and not enough manufacturing to put out, especially with these tariffs. So there's been a lot of slowdown in China in terms of development, human capital and development, because they need to put these guys to work and export their human labor. And now you're starting to see Xi Jinping go to Africa and go to these and plus the BRICS Forum is trying to make as many deals as possible, because they have a lot of human labor that they need to push out, and Africa is starting to put the clamps down on China with all this labor being sent up there with all this manufacturing. So what Paul Kagoni has been saying, and I think we talked about this earlier, is installing on a 2.5% tariff on Chinese goods coming in.
Now that was my whole gripe with these African countries. When this whole Chinese explosion of giving countries loans, more specifically African countries, they were sending that because that's China's MO. A lot of countries have been talking about that. They would build infrastructure, but they would build infrastructure with Chinese labor, and that was my gripe when in the beginning.
They didn't have
Go ahead, Mike.
Africa doesn't have the literacy or the skill set available immediately to start building infrastructure, which is part of the problem. So I think some of the discussions that has been going on is that send some of these African men and women into China, into these Chinese schools, and teach them engineering from the electrical standpoint to the as well as the manufacturing standpoint, and have them come back. But that's 4 years later to do a bachelor's degree. I mean, your infrastructure has already been built. I mean, China built the biggest highway or the biggest infrastructure bridge in Africa in less than 4 years in Mozambique.
Yeah, I was gonna say I saw them retrofit an entire bridge in 48 hours.
Right.
They work fast. I mean, yeah, they're not really invested in it to the extent where they're coming in to invest in the education. Like, look, they're coming in for the infrastructure, right? And they're going to bring they know how it's built, and they know how it needs to, they know how it's built, and they know how it needs to be assembled and put into place. Now, I agree with Mike. Now, what you do is you, as the nation that's welcoming in this infrastructure. Now, within all of the negotiations, you need to have some sort of long-term ROI in all of this.
300-year plan.
Yeah. So within all this, it says, okay, well, look, if you're going to do this, then you need to allow my people access to all of your technology and all of your information with regards to it, and educate our people on it so that we can maintain it, manufacture it, produce it in the future, right? And then even with that manufacturing and production within the future, you have I forgot what they call it, but basically it's when you put something on paper that just says, look, 20 years into the future, we hit these goals, we'll also be talking about building out manufacturing facilities and all of that. So this is like, you're talking about long-term partnership, to sum it up.
Okay. Because I know in Senegal, South Korea built that statue because Senegal was having a renaissance, like an art renaissance, and they built that whole statue, and the government paid for that, and Africans in the diaspora would celebrate. Oh, look what Africa did! Look what Africa did! I'm like, well, Africa didn't do that. It was foreign engineers that did that. And
well, it might have just been a gift. That happens between nation states. Like kind of like France sent the the Statue of Liberty over to the United States. It could have just been a gift. South Korea wants to penetrate their way into global markets outside of the United States as the market starts to contract from the west to the east. So they want to kind of penetrate these markets, and Africa is the battleground right now, for new growth. So Japan has already tried to Japan has already made their way into Africa, as well as the Middle East, and so the Gulf states. South Korea is trying to get in, and then you have China, who's the 800-pound gorilla in the room with the infrastructure.
Right.
I really don't see any reason not to invest into Africa at this point. If you're a Black American, I just don't. I don't see how you can pass that up.
With all the countries you just said, now let's compare all the countries you just said. You just said China, India, Japan, South Korea, and a few more other places, a few other countries that are India are trying to get into Africa and invest into Africa. Let's compare those countries, and let's say all those countries we just named are trying to invest into France or Germany. Let's pick Germany.
Mhm.
What I'm trying to point out is this. It's another grab into Africa. It's another grab into Africa. All of these countries coming in and grabbing some type of wealth in Africa and extracting it for themselves. They're extracting it for themselves. You wouldn't necessarily see that if it was a non-African country. You
Not
understand?
necessarily.
No,
Not
they did that
necessarily.
in South America with the U.S. That's what they did all the time.
Okay, well, look at South America. We're not talking how Argentina is where you go if you want to learn this or do this. What's being left behind?
Well, what I'm saying here is this: because Africa is largely unstructured in terms of its governance the last 20 years. It's just now getting to that point, and now that the money is being redistributed across the continent, you're seeing people with more spending power than what they had in 2001. So what I'm saying is now people have the ability to spend now, but a lot of the first world the first world benefits that not dollars, but the benefits that we've been having all of these years, the last 50, 60 years of spending power, now that's starting to be, you're starting to see Africa start to have some spending power as well. So that's why there's an urgency to rush into Africa and start selling goods, because America has already been tapped out at this point. And you look at the Midwest, people are out of work. Opioid addiction, people aren't spending money anymore like that.
Right.
Now I agree with you.
No.
I agree with you when you say black person should invest in Africa. I 100% wholeheartedly agree with you on that.
Mhm.
My thinking what I'm thinking is continental Africans. You're getting this influx of money. You're getting all this money. What are they going to do with the money? Are they going to be smart or practical and reinvest back to Africa, or are they going to say, well, I never had this when I was a kid, so I'm going to buy 45 Jordans?
Are you saying Africans or the African Americans?
Africans.
No,
Because they're not hyper capitalists. Yeah, they're not hyper capitalists like Americans are.
Yeah.
Well,
they're more like socialist.
Well,
And in
China
terms,
a lot of Chinese were the same thing. Look at them now.
no, this is different. China has something like 60, maybe 70 to 80% savings rates. Compare that to the United States, where most people are either in debt or have like an average of 5 to 10% of their income in savings.
So
Africa is closer to China in that regard.
So
where
what
people
you all,
save.
So what you all are saying to me is the vast majority of Africans with this new influx of money is going to continue to save.
But you have to make the distinction. Are you talking about the African government or the people? The people are going to save. I mean, what distinction are you making? Are you talking about the government or the people?
No, the people, strictly the people.
Oh, yeah.
Even with the people, I mean, culture, cultures in Africa and like in Asia, we view the lens in which we view things is vastly different, right? Like we can't look at how we see things and then presuppose that they'll see them the same way. Right?
No, I'm not doing that. I'm looking at other countries in which they were poor at one point in time, and now they had an influx of money, and they're going batshit crazy because they say, "Oh, we got money now, so we can act like Europeans, buying all this property." You see in China when marriage was very up there and sacred. Now people getting divorced so they can buy 2 properties.
Mm-hmm. Are you worried about kind of like the American capitalist system?
Yeah,
he means the westernization of culture and embedding in themselves into African culture. I don't think that's happening. I think what you're starting to see now is the scramble to establish families, establish more land. See, land development and land ownership is really the topic of the day now, because European colonialist powers are now starting to pull out. And if they're not pulling out, there's moves being made politically to actually get these guys out. So that's not even on their mind. And I don't think that will be on their mind, because they are very non-hyper capitalist mentality is just not there. They don't operate that way. If you go back to the 1970s and look up Mugabe,
a lot of them were communist countries.
Yeah, they were heavily communist, and that's why China integrates well into their whole entire infrastructure, because the West is different, and that's what Mugabe was talking about in the 70s. Right. He said, we see how you guys live, and we don't want anything to do with that. And that's what drew the dividing line between Africa and United States, or Western powers, in comparison to the East, with Russia and China. And I just read a report this morning talking about from the BRICS Forum, talking about how much Russia is going to start investing into Africa now, because Russia has been dumping technology into Africa the last maybe 10 to 15 years, with satellite technology, as well as trams, some of these new trams that they have with autonomous. What would you say?
No, it's like tractors. Yeah, trams and tractors and stuff like that.
Yeah, they have a lot of stuff that they
can. Vehicles.
Yeah, they have a lot of stuff that they can export into Africa in order to develop it. And looking at some of the videos this morning of South Africa and Zimbabwe and some of those southern and western countries, they look pretty much better than places like Baltimore, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
They're cleaner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Nairobi was like that too.
I understand what you are saying. Trust me, I want to believe it.
No, but Lionel, you have a very valid concern.
Yeah,
there's nothing more corrosive than American capitalism.
Right. Now it's not just specifically American capitalism. It's the thought of, okay, I have this money now, and we all know a large portion of Africa's population is either 35 and below. You have all this money. You seen your mother. Listen, you seen your mother, your father, your grandparents struggle. Then you have this influx of money. Are you really saying that? I'm not saying all, but the vast majority, the percentage that's needed to carry on this culture, it will look at this money, this influx of money. Now you have this. Now you are being projectile into the middle class. And now you say, well, we're going to continue to do the same thing we were doing. We were working on $1.50 a day.
No, that's not necessarily the case. Look,
it's a possibility.
The money, it's a possibility, but the fact of the matter is this: the infusion of the cash. Number one, it's not coming in the form of like cash handouts to all the populations, right? That's not how it's coming. That's not, you know what I mean? Ain't making it rain on the population. That's not how it's coming in. It's coming in through infrastructure investment. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing, it's not coming from the United States. There's a caveat to that.
But it don't have to come from the United States for that.
No, you got to. But look, let's think about this. If I come in and I say, okay, look, I'm gonna throw $10 billion at a country in Africa, right? Do you think it's going to be in my interest for me to invest in that nation, for them to then go and spend it out and culturally adapt spending habits, right? That don't own my own investment in there. Like look, the value that's going to be coming behind all of this isn't coming from the West.
I know it doesn't have to come from the West. You all just said that a lot of Western countries are tapped out. You all just mentioned it, and how Africa is a new market to sell your goods to.
No. You're misunderstanding that. When we say the Western states or the Western powers are tapped out, we mean in terms of growth, right? You can only sell so many iPhones, you can only sell so many SUVs, is what I'm saying. So when it comes to Africa, Right. I'm saying those goods are that market for goods is already tapped out, and I'm saying Africa is a new market that needs very similar commodities, but more tailored to their market. So that's why you if you look over there, they have something called key cars that in Japan, and maybe Ulysses might know what I'm talking about. These very micro style cars that are really good for confined, cities and spaces. Well, Africa has largely unstructured.
Narrow road.
2/3 of the continent is unstructured, so there's a demand to start developing the continent in a way that could be applicable for these new type of vehicles, whether they're EVs or autonomous vehicles. That this is all right ground. That's what I'm saying. This is right ground for development.
Yeah,
and you're going to see more countries try to invest into this and try to take it, try to get on board while they can before they get locked out, because China just gobbles up the whole entire continent to itself.
I could say this: if it was up to fucking Yvette Carnell, you'd never be over there.
What's the matter with you, Nicole? You don't like waiting for reparations?
No. You know something? I'm gonna come sit on my duff here. I'll wait.
I'll
wait for I'll sit on my duff here in the States. I'll wait.
Hey,
I'll wait for reparations.
Well, trust me, I understand the infrastructure. I agree. Africa need infrastructure. I'm agreeing with what you all are saying. I agree with that. But the what's on the other side of that penny, the other side of that coin, the other side of that, what's on the other side, the next step, we have this infrastructure and this influx of money. Okay, are they going to act sensibly and say, well, we're going to say 60%? You understand what I'm trying to get at? It doesn't have to be.
Save 60. What did you say? Save 60%?
No, he's talking about the savings rate.
Yeah, the savings rate. When you get all this money, man, if you got a big pile of money in front of you, it's hard to stick to your morals for some people.
So what do you say? What do you say? They're going to blow all the money up? That's what you're saying? They're going to get the money and it's going to blow it up? Is that what you're saying? They're going to waste it?
But there's no evidence to support that, because if you look at
that's exactly what I'm saying. There is no evidence to support it.
There's no evidence to support that, and there's no if you look at the landscape for what it is right now, even the Africans who do have the money to spend, they're not out there really doing that. What are they doing? They're investing it into other areas, which is why you see your most talented Africans come to America. The money gets invested into the human resource, the human capital to be greater and more proficient in other areas of the world, rather than to be spending it on material goods. You just don't see it like that over there. And plus, they don't have that market anyways, right? Because they're not a hyper-capitalist society. It's not like, guys are running around with Lexuses and Bentleys, and they're sitting at home playing Xbox. Africans don't have that sort of problem. So when I say that we should be trying to get over there and invest, I'm thinking from a larger standpoint. A multinational financial institution created by us through a cryptocurrency that allows us to export our U.S. dollars into a specific type of coin that allows us to do business on the continent without actually losing out and paying taxes back into the federal government. And the alphabet boys chasing us around.
That's a great idea. They're going to try to chase you around anyway, but that is an idea that I think whose time has actually has come. So I would totally agree with that. Totally.
No, but this is definitely a valid concern, because this is not the 70s and 80s anymore. Now we have social media, right? Mm-hmm. And as more and more people in Africa get onto the internet, who knows what kind of foolishness can start, cropping up, right? So,
Lionel sounds like a hater. Lionel sounds like a hater.
No, but to Lionel's point, some of this stuff is already happening in some of the more developed West African countries, like Ghana, definitely Nigeria. There's a lot of crazy shit happening there.
It's a dangerous influence, and when I see stories of a guy burying his father in a Mercedes, a newly bought Mercedes. Come on, like really? What? That?
Okay, but you know what?
I didn't hear what you said. I didn't hear what you said. I know.
I was saying it's a concern for me because when I hear stories of a man burying his father in a Mercedes Benz, that type of stuff is you just throwing away money. I mean, shit, we wouldn't even do that.
Well, we used to build them in pyramids, so.
Well, I was gonna say, I mean, there's never not been a time, right, where there's ever where people haven't like gone out in a flare of exuberance, right? Like, and that's across all cultures. I mean, look, man, I mean, look, we have to give African folks some credit here. They're not that backwards and primitive, dude. Like, yeah, you know what I mean? It's like they got a level of like modernity to them. It's just.
You don't have to be backwards to you don't have to be backwards to blow your money.
Well, no. What I'm saying is that even in Africa, I mean, people they have a look. Even if you're not like based in Western culture, even if you're from like an Asian, okay, there's people there that also they floss, dude, and like there's people out there that make it rain and all that kind of stuff. Even if they're So what I'm saying is then it's something that's commonplace across the board. It really shouldn't be a concern.
No. It's in defense of line out. Okay, take China for example. Very similar to Africa, a lot of African countries in this respect. High savings rate. People are generally very frugal. They're smart with their money. 67% savings rates. But then fast forward after the opening of China, 90s, early 2000s, the first generation, second generation rich start entering the country. They're more open to Western influences. And the entire moral fabric of China has been upended by the huge, influx of money. So that is definitely, a point to consider.
I think that's true to a certain extent, but when you're talking about Black people and Africans in particular, you don't really see that. I don't see any evidence proving that. I don't. So there's no trajectory to actually run off of in that regard. Because even we. When I see Black people go to Africa, like search for Huru, he doesn't look like from the pictures and videos he's posted. I don't see any evidence of that.
But I think he purposely don't live in those. He doesn't visit those sections of the countries he visits. Mm-hmm. I think he purposely. All right, I'm gonna show this video. I'm just saying I'm concerned with the influences. Let me show my screen. I was looking on something. This is from 7 months ago. Inside the lives of the rich kids of Africa. Now, granted, I understand they are from affluent. They are affluent, but people are looking at this. This is what they see, and when you have a population that's majority 35 and below. A lot of people are not going to have that.
That's due to African corruption.
Yeah, and I want to say this: for some reason, when certain people get money, they all of a sudden become more European. They all of a sudden
they call them Negropeans.
Well, yeah, I mean, hello, gentlemen. When we talking about Africa, you remember we talking about that's a big continent. It's like so much, diversity there. So it's kind of depends.
Yeah, it's kind of like a broad. We're painting it with a bit of a broad brush here.
Right. You can go places where you can see, great wealth or what we would call middle class and upper middle class. You can see that abundantly in some places, in many places. So. It just, like you were saying, Ulysses was saying, yeah, that's just like we make it rain when we got it, we on it.
I mean, but let's also look at the other side of this too, right? We also have to look at the environment in which the wealth was acquired. Now, Mike just point being the source of a lot of these ill-gotten gains, right? Now, if you look at that versus strategic infrastructure investment. So if you're talking about wealth that's been acquired through infrastructure investment. You've got manufacturing plants, refining facilities, stuff like this being built, which then cultivates a working class, right? We're not necessarily talking about just a class of people that just kind of like just got a windfall. That's why I was like, okay, well, look, you're not talking about people just coming in and just, helicopter, right? Just throw the money from the sky and it's not happening. This is through work development. This is through, education programs, I'm talking about specialty education programs within the major universities and stuff like that, which serve a lot of the industrial development that's going on. So there's a pro or a con, right? Which one do you want to harp on? Which one do you want to actually try to go about actualizing? If your plan is to go for the pro variant, then you're going to take the cons into consideration and work in stop gaps and going to work in stop measures and ensure that the pro plan is what's carried out. Not every expression of wealth ends up being an expression of exuberance and waste and things of that sort.
But on top of that,
look at Warren Buffett.
Working hard and busting your butt and building wealth if you don't go out and bury your father in a Mercedes Benz.
Mike, say that again.
I said, look at Warren Buffett.
Berkshire Hathaway, yeah.
Well, he still drives a Nissan Altima.
What I'm getting at is the influence, the dangerous influence that have it. You have the European countries that know they about to lose their butter biscuits. Okay, you have African people that are going to gradually come into money through better infrastructure, more jobs, etc., etc. To me, if I'm on the losing end of the stick, I push my products into Africa, such as the Hermes or the Givenchy and other European products, to try to get a piece of that pie. And that's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of a lot of black people becoming more black people, as we see it here, becoming more Europeans. Because that's what happened in China. They got in the money. All of a sudden, you see more. What would the equivalent be? China peens or something like that. They moving up Australia, moving to the west coast of the United States and Canada. The parents are sending their children to these. I'm not saying all, but what I'm saying is, parents sending their children to these European schools, thinking they're going to get a better education, but the influence is what I'm talking about, and that's the influence I'm trying to stamp out. I'm all for black people investing in Africa. I'm all for Africa, doing good. I'm all for that. It's just the influence that I'm afraid of, that I want to stamp out. Not I would like to. I want to stamp out.
Well, look. Here's how. Go ahead, Mark.
No, I was just gonna say, if you want to stand out, you can always wear that racing jacket.
Oh no, not stand out. Stamp out. And
stamp out.
Stamp out there. Nah, I got rid of it.
Well, look. What I can say to that is this: look, it's beneficial. It would be beneficial, right? To if you're gonna own your wealth, then be responsible for it, right? And when I say be responsible for it, I mean that in every sense of the word. Okay, it's not a guaranteed scenario, right? That if you acquire wealth, then you're going to become "quote unquote" a Negropean, right? I think that there can be expressions of wealth that are organic to us. I think that's possible. I really do, right? I don't think that, and this might be where philosophically I might depart from some of my elders, but I don't believe that just because you acquire wealth, you somehow have then beset the mindset of quote unquote white supremacy. I don't believe that at all. So I think that. Oh, what? Okay. Well, let me finish here. So, look, wealth is to be utilized. If you want to take a very utilitarian approach to it, it's to be utilized for something. Okay. If we all choose to take that mindset and adapt that, then the expression of it, how it's used, what we do with it, we'll see different things from it than what we've traditionally seen.
Okay, may I?
Yeah.
I think if you missed what you just said it when you talked about the way we spend wealth. There's a way to do it that's what's the word? Did you say organic to our culture? Is that what you said?
I said it can be an organic expression of wealth, right? It's an organic expression as opposed to this notion or this idea.
But you linked it to culture. That's all. That's the part I want to focus on, and this there's a disconnect in our broader community, I guess, across generations about the significance and centrality, the significance of culture. Because if you don't have a proper culture, you don't have the code to instruct people, or where people can gain instruction for what proper behavior is. So you can't, I'm not saying you, but we as a broader community, we can't on one day say, try to de-emphasize the significance of culture. Then later on, we want to measure one another based upon something that should come from within our culture. But we always want to minimize the significance of it. We're going to have to deal with this cultural problem or issue head on, and as African Americans, we really are in no place to talk about what Black folks throughout the diaspora do with their money, because we have our own cultural issues which we don't want to face. That's all.
The only thing I would say is just be careful about this money issue, because it's have you guys ever seen an old woman fall and no one pick her up off the ground, right? Have you guys ever seen this? Where people just walk around her?
No.
I've seen it.
Oh, you seen it in the US? Oh, okay.
Yes.
I've never seen that before. But for example, in China, that happens all the time because they're afraid that she will scam them by pretending, or old people throwing themselves under cars to get
that stuff is ridiculous.
Insurance payments from people. So don't underestimate money, screwing up people's cultures.
Communism. But that's why communism was largely adopted in Africa, was to control that sort of behavior.
Hello?
Yeah,
we all here.
Okay.
I was hoping BGS would get on here, but
yeah, it's a little late with the stream. You guys want to?
Lionel, on the last slot, just before you go, give me a time. I want to do a chart, but it don't really fit with this. Just give me the last slot.
You go ahead.
You say what?
You go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, it just completely changed the subject. It goes back to the Exxon and stuff.
Oh yeah. He just this is open mic.
I can't.
We actually should go offline after Darwood does his charts.
Yeah. So you ready? Y'all ready for me to take it?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, we got into a good conversation in the chat, which I hadn't looked at Exxon in a bit, and the chat made me look it up. Let's see. Can everybody see this Exxon chart?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. Let me start you off on. Of course, I'm using free chart anybody can go to. It's barchart.com. I'm looking at a quarterly chart, so each candlestick is 3 months. You can see this trend kind of started at least back to 1989. 1, 2. Of course, I'm a practitioner of Elliott wave theory, and the theory goes that prices move in the cycle of 5. Okay, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, then we started falling, and I want to show you something. There you go. All right. So we had a nice little retrace here from the decline in January. No, I'm sorry. No, this is not January. This decline is from 2014. Okay, so we had a nice little decline, you know. So we still have not taken out the low from 2015. If well, I'm going to go down to a weekly chart to show you something there, but I just want to give you the bigger view so that I can make a reference to if we come below this low here at $66, the next low here is 55.94. I'm looking at the information box.
Well, you can just
upper
put
left.
this in a bar and heat it up.
You say hello?
I'm talking to his daughter.
Okay, so basically, if I believe we're going to continue going down, and so this $43.41 level is in play. But let me show you what caught my attention tonight while we were in the chat. Okay, so this is the January decline, the leg of the decline from this year. But as we know, it started really declining in 2014. We're just dealing with, you know, this section of the leg. That's all we're dealing with. But in the bigger picture, we're in a triangle. You can put a base here and put a resistance here, and you see we're in a triangle. And triangles is usually continuation patterns. So that in and of itself suggests we're going down. The retrace from, I'm just going to do this January. Okay, so January we fell to April 2nd, right after April Fool's Day. We dropped down to 72.16. We had a run up, just 38 point to whatever 38. That's 62%. That's a key Fibonacci level. So when you start to see price kind of go sideways right around the Fibonacci level, that's suspicious. I'm looking on a weekly chart now, and when you see the stochastic, was overbought here at the January point. It came down, it was oversold. We went right back to the same general area where we declined from the last time. So the buying activity got us back into the overbought territory without the price making a new high. That is a bad sign. It suggests that there wasn't enough, the force that brought the price down, the buying pressure that got us back to the overbought territory was not great enough to make us return to this high. As I said, the triangle pattern we were in is a continuation pattern. And what we have here, which is really suspicious, I didn't notice until we were in the chat when you guys were talking about steel and different things. I was looking at some charts. Okay, over here we got I say that this section here is what I'm looking at, and I'm saying that this is a head and shoulders pattern. This left shoulder here, I'm looking at the information box to the left. The high says 83.79. Keep that in mind. This candlestick right here is the one that we're in for this week, and this high is 83.74. We're a nickel away from taking out this high, which we may not do, and I'll show you why I don't think we will. And we have the head. So you have the head, the left shoulder, the right shoulder. If we reverse and take out this low point between the two shoulders, that's a bad sign. And all these automated trading systems are programmed to notice this head and shoulders pattern, and they are especially programmed to get out if this low is violated right here. So it's not like a human being will make a decision. Computer programs will fire off trading, and this will be a global signal. So if this happens, it's gonna be ugly. So now let me show you what I saw when I went down to. I'm going to zoom down to the 5-minute level to look and see what's going on here. I wanted to know when I first saw this setup that looked like a head and shoulders. I wanted to know the likelihood that we would make that extra nickel higher and take out this left shoulder, which would invalidate the head and shoulder setup, and then that would cause me to pay attention or focus on this peak here to see if we would take that out. So you kind of track the trend in this way. Now I went all the way down to the 5-minute chart, and we are overbought on the 5-minute stochastic. Now these shorter time frames are less significant than longer time frames, but as I discussed on previous shows, the rule of a trend is higher highs and higher lows in an uptrend. So you have a high here. Each candle is higher than the previous one, okay, including this final one, and each low is higher than the previous low. It's like walking up the steps. Now this final candlestick violated the rule because it made a lower low, and this is what we call an outside move, a bearish engulfing candlestick. It's red, so it's bearish, and it engulfed the high and the low engulfed this previous candlestick. So that makes this a bearish engulfing candlestick. It moved outside the parameter of the previous one, and programs are programmed to notice this. So now we're going to be watching what happens tomorrow. So if anybody's up at 3 o'clock in the morning when London opens, pay attention to oil. Pay attention to Exxon tomorrow, because if this thing gets going, you will know to not take it lightly, that the resumption of that downturn that from January will be in effect. Everybody's going to be looking for it. Not going to be too many. If I was to put a trend line here along this bottom, if that trend line is violated, you can go to your own 5-minute chart and go to this low here from 3:55 p.m. on the 23rd. Put that line there. If that support is violated, not too many professionals are going to jump in to save it. Now they're not going to jump in to buy this. So that's what I wanted to show you. Keep your eyes on the markets tomorrow.
So what's the implication of that?
The implication is, if that trend line is violated, the next thing we will do is that if that trend line is violated, that gives support to the idea that this may be a valid head and shoulders pattern, which is a negative pattern. So then everyone will be looking to see if this. Let me show you. Let me show you something.
No, I meant to the overall either global economy, the global.
Oh, I'm sorry. Very good question. I'm sorry. Exxon is the second largest. I believe they're the second largest company by market cap in the United States. Apple overtook them. I believe Exxon is the largest oil company in the world. So that would be just like the price of steel. That will trigger. Okay, I've already been telling everyone that gold is sitting on a key support, and I believe gold is going to fall. Oil is I'm showing you with Exxon here that Exxon looks suspicious, like it could fall. You were discussing earlier about those steel tariffs, okay, and that's having a negative influence on the price of steel, and all of that is going to accrue to dollar strength, U.S. dollar strength. So does that answer your question? The dollar will rise. All of these major commodities, energy and metals, will fall, and that would cause a red day on global markets.
Right. So this is more of the setup for a longer term downtrend.
Yeah, set up for long-term downtrend, okay, and a newsworthy negative day on the markets. It'll be news everywhere. If Exxon starts going down big, it's gonna shake up the world.
It's gonna send a ripple effect.
Say that again, Mike.
It's gonna send a ripple effect.
Absolutely. So
it'll reverberate in the market.
Especially with today being Thursday, the significance of Friday is really the significant day, because nobody wants to hold. If a show of faith in a market is when you hold your money in a stock across the weekend. If people are too spooked to hold their money in Exxon at the close on Friday, that'll tell you a lot right there too. So how they feel Friday, could be determined by how they feel about what happens today. Today being Thursday on the East Coast. So today, stock market is one of those days to keep your eye on what happens with oil and gold. That's all I got.
You said today is keep your eye on oil and gold?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm trying to throw it back, get out of this.
Thank you all for tuning in. And you listen to Instagram. When are you all rescheduling your show?
We're not sure yet.
Well, don't forget to come back Friday for Economics on Monday to Friday. Any other last comments?
Man, peace out.
Check y'all later.